The invitation sat on Ethan Cole's kitchen counter like a loaded gun. Cream cardstock, gold embossed lettering, his ex-wife's name linked to another man's in elegant script. A wedding announcement designed not to invite, but to wound. Ethan stared at it, his daughter Mia's hopeful eyes watching him from across the breakfast table, and felt the familiar weight of being measured and found wanting settle onto his shoulders once more. He didn't know it yet, but in 5 days, he would walk into that wedding alone, humiliated in front of a ballroom full of strangers, and then watch everything change when the one person he never expected stepped out of a black sedan and took his hand. But before we get there, I need you to do something for me. If you want to see how this story ends, if you want to know what happens when the most powerful woman in the city decides to stand beside a man the world has written off, hit that like button right now and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Ethan Cole had learned to make himself invisible. It was a skill honed over 3 years of single parenthood, developed in the margins of corporate hallways and parent-teacher conferences where he was always the only father in a sea of mothers. At 32, he had perfected the art of taking up exactly as much space as he was given. No more, no less. And in the gleaming tower of Cross Industries, that space was precise and small. The 53rd floor was a study in controlled elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's financial district, where glass and steel monuments to ambition stretched toward a sky that never quite committed to blue. Ethan's desk sat in the antechamber to the executive suite, a position that was both central and peripheral, critical and forgettable. He was the gatekeeper, the translator, the invisible force that kept Vivian Cross's empire running with mechanical precision. And he was exceptional at it. "Mr. Cole," the voice came through the intercom with the temperature of winter morning. "The Meridian contracts. My desk. Now." Ethan was already moving. He'd anticipated the request 17 minutes earlier when Vivian's 9 a.m. with the acquisition team had run 4 minutes over schedule, a microscopic eternity in her meticulously calibrated day. The contracts were already printed, tabbed, and annotated with the 3 discrepancies she would inevitably find before the legal team did. He entered her office without knocking. She'd trained him out of that courtesy 6 months into his tenure. Knocking implied uncertainty, and Vivian Cross had no use for uncertainty. "Page 14, Clause 7, Ethan said, placing the document on her desk with the relevant section facing her. "The termination language creates an exit window they can exploit in Q4. Page 23, the liability cap is 15% below industry standard for assets of this class. And page 41, the indemnification structure exposes us to third-party litigation." Vivian finished, her eyes scanning the page with predatory focus. She was 41, though her face held that ageless quality that came from ruthless discipline and excellent genetics. Dark hair pulled into a flawless chignon, a charcoal suit tailored to communicate power without ostentation, and gray eyes that could dissect a balance sheet or a human soul with equal efficiency. She looked up at him with something that might have been approval on anyone else. On Vivian Cross, it registered as a fractional decrease in disapproval. "Acceptable work, Mr. Cole. Send it back to legal with these notes. I want revisions by 3 p.m. Ethan nodded and turned to leave. "And Mr. Cole?" He paused at the threshold. "The coffee you brought this morning was 2 degrees cooler than optimal. Adjust accordingly." "Yes, Ms. Cross." Back at his desk, Ethan allowed himself the luxury of a slow exhale. 5 years he'd been Vivian Cross's executive secretary, and in that time he'd never made the same mistake twice. He'd learned her preferences with anthropological precision: coffee at 187 degrees, reports with sans serif fonts at exactly 11 point, silence unless directly addressed, and above all, boundaries. Vivian Cross maintained boundaries the way medieval castles maintained moats, as fundamental architecture, non-negotiable and absolute. She arrived at 6:47 a.m. She left at 7:23 p.m. She attended exactly 4 corporate social functions per quarter, stayed for exactly 90 minutes, and spoke to exactly the people who mattered for business. She had no visible personal life, no friends who weren't strategic relationships, and no patience for the messy, inefficient chaos of human emotion. Ethan respected that. He understood it, even. In a world that had repeatedly demonstrated that hope was a liability and trust a luxury, Vivian's cold precision felt almost comforting. She would never promise what she couldn't deliver. She would never make you believe in something that wasn't real. She would never, ever break your heart. His phone buzzed. A text from Mia's school. Parent-teacher conference reminder. Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Ethan's jaw tightened. Thursday. The same day as Vivian's presentation to the board, which meant he'd need to leave by 3 to make it across town in time. He'd already shifted her schedule twice this month for Mia's dentist appointment and the school play. There was a limit to how many times you could prioritize an 8-year-old's needs over a CEO's expectations before the math stopped working in your favor. He pulled up Vivian's calendar and started the delicate work of rearranging her afternoon, moving the 4 p.m. with the CFO to 2:30, condensing the strategy meeting from 90 minutes to 60, and creating a buffer that would let him slip out without disrupting her day. The intercom crackled. "Mr. Cole, I'm aware of what you're doing to my schedule. While I appreciate the geometric efficiency, I'm not made of compressed time. Expand the strategy meeting back to 90 minutes and move the CFO to tomorrow morning." Ethan closed his eyes. Of course she'd noticed. Vivian Cross noticed everything. "Yes, Ms. Cross, I apologize." "Don't apologize. Reschedule." "And Mr. Cole, your daughter's academic development is a legitimate priority. Leave at 2:45. I'll survive an hour of administrative solitude." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the intercom, something warm and unfamiliar flickering in his chest. It died quickly. Gratitude was just another form of hope, and hope had broken him before. But for a moment, it had been there. The invitation was waiting when he got home that evening, propped against the fruit bowl like an accusation. Mia had already found it, of course. 8 years old, and she had the investigative instincts of a detective and the emotional range of a classical pianist. A dangerous combination inherited from her mother's intelligence and Ethan's sensitivity, weaponized by the divorce neither of them had wanted to put her through. "Daddy." She was sitting at the kitchen table, homework abandoned, the cream cardstock invitation held in both hands like something fragile. "Mom's getting married." Ethan set down his briefcase and moved to the refrigerator, buying himself 5 seconds to construct his face into something neutral and supportive. "I know, sweetheart. That's wonderful news." "You don't sound like it's wonderful." He pulled out the ingredients for spaghetti, their Thursday ritual, the one constant in a week of carefully negotiated custody schedules and emotional landmines. "Your mom deserves to be happy, Mia. If Derek makes her happy, then I'm happy for her." It was a good lie. He'd practiced it. Mia wasn't buying it. She had Tessa's ability to see through bullshit and Ethan's inability to hide what he felt, which meant she existed in a state of perpetual, uncomfortable clarity about the adults in her life. "She wants you to come to the wedding." Ethan's hand stilled on the pasta box. "Does she?" "She told me it's important that we're all there as a family, that just because you and Mom aren't married anymore doesn't mean we can't celebrate important things together." Mia's voice had taken on that careful, rehearsed quality that meant she was repeating adult words she didn't quite believe. "She said it would be mature and healthy and good for me to see you both being supportive of each other." Of course Tessa had said that. Tessa, who had a master's degree in psychology and used it like a scalpel, carving out exactly the life she wanted while making everyone around her feel grateful for the cuts. Ethan filled a pot with water, measuring his words as carefully as the salt he added. "And what do you want, Mia? Not what Mom wants, not what you think I want. What do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city hummed its evening song, traffic and voices and the distant wail of sirens, all the noise of people living their lives in close proximity without really touching. "I want you to come," Mia said finally, her voice small. "I don't want to be there without you. All of Mom's new friends are going to be there, and Derek's family, and everyone's going to be looking at me like I'm this sad kid from a broken home, and if you're not there, it's going to be worse. At least if you're there, I can—" She trailed off. "You can what, baby?" "I can pretend it's okay, that we're okay, that you're okay." The water started to boil. Ethan watched the bubbles rise and break, tiny catastrophes playing out in miniature, and felt something crack in the center of his chest. "When is it?" "Saturday, 5 days from now, at the Grandview Hotel." Mia's voice brightened with desperate hope. "Will you come? Please?" The Grandview Hotel, of course. Where else would Tessa marry Derek Hayes, the real estate developer whose net worth started with a number Ethan couldn't conceptualize and ended with the word millions? The grand view, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, where the cheapest room cost more than Ethan made in a month. "I'll be there," Ethan heard himself say. "I promise." Mia launched herself at him, arms wrapping around his waist with the fierce, uncomplicated love of a child who still believed her father could protect her from everything. Ethan held her and stared at the invitation over her head, already calculating the cost of this promise. A suit. He'd need a new suit. The one he'd worn to job interviews 3 years ago was starting to shine at the elbows, and showing up to Tessa's society wedding, looking like a man who bought his clothes at discount outlets, would only confirm what everyone already suspected, that he'd been a temporary stop on her journey to someone better. A gift. What do you buy for the woman who left you because you weren't ambitious enough, and the man who has everything except the good sense to see that she collects people like trophies? And somehow, some way, he'd need to walk into that ballroom with his head up and his dignity intact, pretending that being seated at whatever table they'd assigned him, something numbered high enough to communicate his irrelevance, was exactly where he wanted to be. Friday arrived with the weight of impending disaster. Ethan had been awake since 4:30 a.m., unable to shake the anxiety that had taken up residence in his chest like a second heartbeat. He'd done the math 3 times. The suit would cost $400 if he went to the department store, $200 if he risked the outlet mall, and even that would mean cutting into the buffer he kept for Mia's emergencies. By 6 a.m., he was at his desk, working through Vivian's morning briefing materials with unusual intensity, trying to outrun the thoughts that circled like sharks. Vivian arrived at 6:47, as always. She paused at his desk for exactly 3 seconds longer than usual, her eyes scanning his face with the clinical precision she usually reserved for financial statements. "You look unwell, Mr. Cole." "I'm fine, Miss Cross. Your briefing materials are ready, and I've flagged the 3 items that require immediate attention." She didn't move. "You've consumed approximately 4 times your normal caffeine intake this morning. Your tie is aligned 2 degrees off center, a mistake you haven't made in 18 months. And you've reorganized the surface of your desk 3 times in the past hour. The last time you exhibited these particular stress markers was when your daughter had pneumonia and you were attempting to hide a family crisis from your employer." Ethan looked up at her, momentarily forgetting the careful neutrality he usually maintained. "You remember when Mia had pneumonia?" "I remember everything, Mr. Cole. It's my defining characteristic." She tilted her head fractionally. "Should I be concerned about your performance today?" "No, Miss Cross. Personal matter. It won't affect my work." Everything affects work. That's the fundamental dishonesty of the phrase work-life balance, as if the two exist in separate containers rather than a single, integrated system. She paused. "However, I respect your boundaries. If you require time off—" "I don't." The words came out harder than he'd intended. "I apologize. I'm managing the situation." Vivian studied him for another moment, and Ethan had the uncomfortable sensation of being X-rayed, every weakness and fault line illuminated for inspection. "Very well," she said finally. "But Mr. Cole, whatever you're managing, manage it before it begins managing you. I've seen that particular trajectory before. It never ends favorably." She walked into her office, and Ethan sat very still, trying to decide if he'd just been warned or cared for, and whether there was any meaningful difference between the two. The day crawled forward with malicious slowness. Ethan moved through his tasks with mechanical efficiency, scheduling, coordinating, problem-solving, translating Vivian's clipped directives into actionable plans for people who found her terrifying. It was work that required him to be 3 people simultaneously: analyst, diplomat, and shield. Most days he found a strange satisfaction in it. Today, it felt like standing in front of a firing squad and catching bullets. At 11:30, his phone rang. "Tessa!" Ethan stepped into the break room before answering, unwilling to have this conversation in the glacial atmosphere of Vivian's outer office. "Ethan, hi!" Tessa's voice had that bright, brittle quality she used when she wanted something. "I'm so glad Mia talked to you about the wedding. I really think this is going to be a wonderful opportunity for all of us to demonstrate healthy co-parenting." "Hello, Tessa. I wanted to call and make sure you have all the details. The ceremony starts at 6 p.m. sharp, so you should plan to arrive by 5:30. The dress code is black tie optional, which really means black tie expected. So if you need to rent something, I'll be appropriately dressed. Of course, of course. I just want to make sure you're comfortable. Derek and I have been so intentional about making this accessible to everyone, even though the venue is quite, well, exclusive. But we didn't want anyone to feel out of place. The subtext was a symphony. Especially you. Especially the man who couldn't give me the life I deserved. Especially the executive secretary who never became the executive. I appreciate the consideration, Ethan said, his voice flat. One more thing. I've seated you at table 14. It's toward the back, but the sight lines are actually quite good, and you'll be with some lovely people from Derek's office. I thought you might appreciate being with professionals who understand the corporate world. Table 14. Not with Mia. Not with anyone he knew. Positioned at the periphery, like a footnote to a story that had moved on without him. That's fine, Tessa. Oh, and Ethan, I know this might be awkward, but if you're seeing anyone, you're welcome to bring a date. I want you to know that Derek and I are completely supportive of you moving on. You deserve happiness too. The words were designed to sound generous. They landed like acid. I'll be there alone. Oh, the single syllable contained entire paragraphs of pity. Well, that's perfectly fine too. I just want to make sure you know you have options. You're still young, Ethan, still capable of finding someone who's right for you. Someone less ambitious than me. Someone who won't mind that you're content being invisible. I need to get back to work, Tessa. Of course. I know how demanding your job is. We'll see you Saturday. And Ethan, thank you. This really means a lot to Mia, to all of us. The line went dead. Ethan stood in the break room, staring at the phone in his hand, and felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settle over him like a coat he couldn't take off. 5 years since the divorce, and Tessa still had the ability to make him feel like he was failing a test he hadn't known he was taking. When he returned to his desk, Vivian's door was open, unusual for midday. She was standing at her window, silhouetted against the city skyline, her posture military straight. Mr. Cole, a moment? He entered cautiously. Being summoned into Vivian's office without a specific task was like being called to the principal's office. Even when you'd done nothing wrong, you started mentally reviewing your crimes. The Hanover merger, Vivian said, not turning from the window. I'll need you to attend the negotiation dinner next Thursday. The CEO responds well to efficient support staff, and your presence will communicate organizational competence. Of course, Ms. Cross. It will run late, likely until 11 p.m. I trust that won't conflict with your personal obligations? No conflict. Mia will be with Tessa next week. Ah, yes. Vivian turned, and Ethan was struck by the precision of her attention. The wedding is this weekend, I believe. He froze. I didn't realize I'd mentioned... You didn't. Your ex-wife called the main office line 3 weeks ago trying to reach you. My assistant transferred her to your desk, but I happened to overhear the gist of the conversation. Something about seating arrangements and appropriate attire. Vivian moved to her desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a document. I assume you're attending. Mia asked me to be there. And you're going alone? It wasn't a question. Ethan felt heat crawl up his neck. Yes. Why? The question was so direct, so completely absent of social cushioning, that Ethan almost laughed. This was Vivian Cross at her most quintessential, seeing the inefficiency in a situation and demanding to know its source. Because I don't have anyone to bring, Ms. Cross. You have a social network, colleagues, friends, presumably, though you've never mentioned them. The mathematical probability that you couldn't secure a companion for a single evening is functionally zero. It's complicated. Everything is complicated. That's a meaningless statement. Vivian sat, folding her hands on the desk with the finality of a closing argument. You're attending your ex-wife's wedding to a man of significant wealth and social standing. You'll be seated in a position designed to communicate your irrelevance, surrounded by people who represent the life she chose over the one you offered. And you're going alone, which means you're going as a target. The clinical accuracy of her assessment stole his breath. Mia needs me there, he said quietly. I don't doubt that. But what you're describing isn't support, it's self-immolation. You're a competent professional, Mr. Cole, arguably one of the most effective executive secretaries in the city. Yet you're about to walk into a situation specifically designed to make you feel small, and you're doing it without even the basic armor of social positioning. She paused. That's not nobility, it's masochism. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. With respect, Ms. Cross, this isn't a business problem. It's not something that can be solved with strategy. Everything can be solved with strategy. That's the fundamental advantage of intelligence over emotion. Vivian's gray eyes held his. You need someone to attend with you, someone whose presence recalibrates the power dynamic. I'm not going to hire an escort to my ex-wife's wedding. I'm not suggesting you hire anyone. She stood, moving around the desk with the deliberate grace of a chess player positioning for checkmate. I'm suggesting you ask me. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He stared at Vivian Cross, his boss, the woman who'd never in 5 years expressed even casual interest in his personal life, who maintained professional boundaries with the fervor of a religious calling, and tried to reconcile what he'd just heard with everything he knew about her. You can't be serious. I'm never not serious, Mr. Cole. It's one of my more tedious qualities. She returned to her desk, the moment of unusual proximity already retracted. I have no personal investment in your romantic history. However, I do have an investment in your professional stability. You've been distracted all week. If attending this wedding alone is going to result in a prolonged period of diminished performance, that becomes my concern. So this is, what? A business decision? All of my decisions are business decisions. I'm offering you the use of my social capital for an evening. Your ex-wife marries into wealth and power. You arrive with someone who embodies both. The strategic advantage is obvious. Ethan's mind was racing, trying to process the surreal reality of this conversation. Ms. Cross, don't appreciate, decide. The wedding is in 5 days. If you want me there, I'll need the time, location, and dress code. If you don't, we'll never discuss this again, and you'll manage your personal crisis on your own time. She picked up her pen, returning her attention to the document in front of her, a clear dismissal. Ethan stood frozen, balanced on a knife's edge between dignity and desperation. The smart move was obvious. Decline politely, maintain the boundaries that had kept their working relationship functional for 5 years, attend the wedding alone and survive it the same way he survived everything else, quietly, competently, invisibly. But Mia's voice echoed in his memory. I can pretend it's okay, that we're okay, that you're okay. And something deeper, darker whispered, what if you didn't have to pretend? What if, just once, you walked into that room and they saw you as someone who mattered? Saturday evening, 6 p.m., Ethan heard himself say. Grand View Hotel, black tie. Vivian didn't look up from her document. I'll be there at 5:45. We'll arrive together. More effective optics. Ms. Cross, Mr. Cole. Now she did look up, and her expression was as neutral and unreadable as ever. This is a transaction. Don't make it more complicated than it is. You need armor. I'm providing it. The cost is that you'll owe me unspecified social capital in the future, to be called upon at my discretion. Do we have an understanding? Every instinct told him to say no. Every humiliation he'd survived by keeping his head down and his expectations low screamed at him to back away from this offer, because accepting help from Vivian Cross would mean owing her something he couldn't calculate or control. But the image of walking into that ballroom alone, of seeing Tessa's pity and Derek's condescension, of watching Mia try to hold her head up while her father was treated like a ghost at his own daughter's mother's wedding. We have an understanding, Ethan said. Good. Now leave. I have actual work to do, and your existential crisis is consuming my afternoon. Ethan walked out of her office on unsteady legs, returning to his desk in a daze. He just made a deal with the devil, or at least with the closest thing to the devil that existed in corporate form. And the strangest part was that he felt, for the first time in 5 days, like he could actually breathe. The weekend crawled toward Saturday with agonizing slowness. Ethan went through the motions, work, parenting, the careful choreography of a life that ran on routine and discipline, while his mind spiraled through increasingly catastrophic scenarios. Vivian wouldn't show up, or worse, she'd show up and make it clear through every word and gesture that this was charity, that Ethan Cole was a charity case. Tessa would see through it immediately. She'd always had the ability to spot Ethan's vulnerabilities the way sharks spotted blood in water. Mia would be confused, hurt, or worse, hopeful about something that wasn't real. By Friday evening, Ethan had worked himself into a state of controlled panic. He'd picked up his new suit, a simple black tuxedo that had required him to dip into savings he'd been building for Mia's summer camp, and tried it on 3 times, each time seeing a different man in the mirror. Sometimes he looked almost credible. Sometimes he looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. "Daddy, you look fancy." Mia stood in his bedroom doorway, already in her pajamas, clutching the stuffed rabbit she still slept with, even though she insisted she was too old for it. "It's for tomorrow, sweetheart." "I know." She came closer, reaching out to touch the fabric of the jacket with careful fingers. "Are you nervous?" "A little." "Me too." Mia looked up at him with those 2 wise eyes. "Mom says Derek's family is really important, that they know senators and stuff." "That's impressive." "Dad?" Her voice went small. "Do you think they're going to like me?" And there it was. The real cost of this wedding, the true price of Tessa's new life. Mia, who should have been excited about flower petals and cake, was instead worrying about whether she'd be good enough for people who measured worth in political connections and bank accounts. Ethan knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "Mia, listen to me. Anyone who meets you and doesn't see how extraordinary you are isn't worth impressing. You are smart and kind and brave, and those things matter more than anything else. Do you understand?" She nodded, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. She'd already learned at 8 years old that the world didn't always agree with her father's assessment of what mattered. "I'm bringing someone tomorrow," Ethan said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "A friend from work. Her name is Ms. Cross, and she's a little intimidating, but she's good at her job and she's very smart. I thought it might be nice to have someone there with us." "A friend?" Mia's face brightened with dangerous hope. "Like a girlfriend." "No, baby, just a friend. Someone who's helping Daddy feel a little braver tomorrow." "Oh." The light dimmed. "That's okay too, I guess." She hugged him goodnight and shuffled off to bed, and Ethan stood alone in his bedroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Tomorrow, he'd walk into that hotel with Vivian Cross on his arm, and either it would change everything or confirm exactly what he'd always suspected, that some gaps were too wide to cross, some distances too far to travel, no matter who you brought along for the journey. He just had to survive the next 24 hours. Then he'd know which. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that felt like mockery. Ethan woke at 5:30 a.m. to sunlight slicing through his bedroom curtains, his heart already racing with a cocktail of anxiety and adrenaline that no amount of deep breathing could settle. He lay there for 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that this was just another day, just another event to survive. It didn't work. By 6 a.m., he was in the kitchen, making coffee with hands that shook just enough to be noticeable. Mia was spending the day with Tessa getting ready for the wedding, hair appointments and dress fittings, and all the rituals that apparently preceded walking down an aisle scattering rose petals. She'd been picked up Friday evening, which meant Ethan had the apartment to himself, a luxury that felt more like solitary confinement. He tried to work, opened his laptop, pulled up the Meridian contracts that still needed review, and stared at the words until they blurred into meaningless shapes. His phone sat on the table beside him, silent and accusatory. Vivian hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't sent any confirmation that she actually intended to show up at 5:45 p.m. as promised. Of course she hadn't. Vivian Cross didn't do reassurance. She made statements and expected them to be believed. But doubt was a persistent thing, and it had all morning to work on him. At 9 a.m., Ethan gave up on productivity and went for a run. He pushed himself harder than usual, trying to outrun the thoughts that circled like vultures. What if Vivian had reconsidered? What if she'd woken up this morning and realized that attending her secretary's ex-wife's wedding was exactly the kind of messy personal entanglement she'd spent her entire career avoiding? What if she simply didn't show up, and Ethan was left standing on the sidewalk at 5:45, waiting for rescue that never came? The humiliation of that scenario was almost worse than attending alone. By noon, he'd showered, shaved, and run through his closet 3 times trying to decide what to wear before the wedding. Something casual enough to not look like he was trying too hard, but polished enough to not look like he'd given up. He settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, then immediately second-guessed the choice. His phone buzzed at 2:17 p.m. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Cole, Vivian Cross, confirming 5:45 p.m. pickup at your address. Send your apartment number and any access codes required. VC. Ethan stared at the message, something unwinding in his chest. She was coming. She was actually coming. He typed out his address and apartment number with fingers that felt clumsy, then added, "Thank you, Ms. Cross." The response came back 30 seconds later. Transaction, not favor. Don't read into it. VC. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. The afternoon stretched into evening with agonizing slowness. At 4 p.m., Ethan started getting dressed, moving through the ritual with the focus of a soldier preparing for combat. The tuxedo fit better than he'd expected. The tailor had done good work for the price, but standing in front of the mirror, Ethan still felt like an imposter. The man looking back at him had the right costume, but underneath he was still just Ethan Cole, executive secretary, single dad, the guy who'd never been quite enough. At 5:30 p.m., his phone rang. Tessa. Ethan, hi. Just wanted to check that you're on your way. The ceremony starts at 6 sharp, and Derek is very particular about timing. I'll be there, Tessa. Wonderful. And you're coming alone, right? I just want to make sure the seating is accurate. Ethan paused, his reflection staring back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Actually, I'm bringing someone. Silence. Then, oh, that's great, Ethan. Who is she? A colleague, Vivian Cross. Another pause, longer this time. Cross? As in, Cross Industries Cross, the CEO? Yes. You're bringing your boss to my wedding. Tessa's voice had gone sharp, the veneer of friendliness cracking just slightly. Ethan, this isn't a networking event. This is a family celebration. You invited me, Tessa. You said I could bring a date. Vivian is my date. She's your employer. That's not the same thing as... Tessa stopped herself, recalibrating. When she spoke again, her voice had regained its bright, brittle quality. Of course. I'm sure she's lovely. I'll have the staff adjust the seating. See you soon? The line went dead, and Ethan set the phone down with a feeling somewhere between satisfaction and dread. He'd just escalated the situation from quiet humiliation to something else entirely, something he couldn't quite predict or control. At 5:40 p.m., he received another text from Vivian. Downstairs, black sedan. Don't make me wait. Ethan grabbed his wallet and keys, took one last look at his apartment, the small, tidy space he'd built for himself and Mia after the divorce, the life he'd constructed out of the rubble of his marriage, and walked out the door. The elevator ride down felt like descending into deep water, pressure building with each floor. By the time he reached the lobby, his heart was hammering against his ribs with enough force to be painful. Outside, parked at the curb with the engine running, was a black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows. The back door opened as he approached, and Vivian's voice cut through the evening air with its usual precision. Mr. Cole, get in. Ethan slid into the back seat and found himself in a space that smelled of leather and expensive perfume. Vivian sat opposite him, and for a moment, Ethan forgot how to breathe. She wore a black gown that was somehow both severe and devastating, the kind of dress that didn't demand attention so much as command it. Her hair was still pulled back, but softer somehow, and she wore minimal jewelry, just diamond studs and a watch that probably cost more than Ethan's car. She looked like power distilled into human form. And sitting across from her in the back of a sedan, Ethan felt the full weight of how insane this plan actually was. You're staring, Mr. Cole. It's unbecoming. Ethan snapped his eyes forward. I apologize, Ms. Cross. You look very professional. One eyebrow arched. Professional. What a devastatingly romantic compliment. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. She settled back against the seat, her gaze assessing him with the same clinical precision she used to evaluate quarterly reports. You'll do. The tuxedo fits properly. You've managed to shave without injuring yourself. And you don't look quite as terrified as you did yesterday morning. Minor victories. The driver pulled away from the curb, and they merged into evening traffic. The city slid past the windows in streaks of light and shadow, familiar streets transformed by the strangeness of the moment. "Miss Cross," Ethan began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the question taking shape in his mind. "If you're going to ask why I'm doing this, don't. I've already explained my reasoning. If you're going to thank me again, also don't. If you're going to apologize for any aspect of this evening, I'll have the driver turn around immediately. I was going to ask about the plan, how we should act?" Vivian's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. "We act like two adults who know each other professionally and have chosen to attend a social function together. Nothing more complicated than that. I'm not going to pretend to be in love with you, Mr. Cole. I'm simply going to be present and let presence do the work." Tessa called. "She knows you're coming." She sounded concerned, threatened, both. Vivian's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Good. That means your ex-wife is intelligent enough to understand what my attendance signals. I'm a third-party validator of your worth. The fact that I'm willing to spend an evening at your side forces her to recalculate your value. That feels manipulative." "It is manipulative. All social interaction is manipulation, Mr. Cole. The only question is whether you're doing it consciously or stumbling through blind." She shifted slightly, smoothing the fabric of her dress. "Tonight, we're being conscious. We walk in together. We're polite, but not effusive. We demonstrate comfort with each other. Nothing romantic, just the ease of two people who work well together. And most importantly, we don't apologize for being there. What if people ask about us? About our relationship? Then we tell them the truth. We're colleagues who occasionally attend social functions together. The human mind will fill in whatever narrative it prefers. Our job is simply not to contradict whatever story they tell themselves." The logic was flawless. The strategy elegant. It was exactly the kind of calculated approach Ethan would expect from Vivian Cross. And yet, sitting across from her in the dimming light, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else at work here, some variable in the equation she wasn't sharing. "Why didn't you just say no?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "Yesterday, in your office. You could have declined. It would have been easier, cleaner, more in line with your boundaries. Why didn't you?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on something beyond the window. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight he'd never heard before. "Because I've been to 1,000 events like this, Mr. Cole. Corporate galas, charity auctions, weddings of people I barely know. And at every single one, I've watched competent, talented people diminish themselves because they bought into someone else's narrative about their worth. I've watched men and women who could run circles around their critics stand in corners, apologizing for taking up space." She turned to look at him directly. "You're an exceptional secretary, possibly the best I've ever had. And yet you were preparing to walk into that ballroom and accept being treated like you're invisible. That struck me as inefficient. So this is about efficiency." "Everything is about efficiency. It's how I make sense of the world." Her expression softened, just fractionally. "But perhaps efficiency can occasionally align with something resembling decency." The car slowed, and Ethan looked out to see the Grandview Hotel rising before them like a monument to wealth and aspiration. The facade was all glass and gold, lit from within by chandeliers that scattered light like handfuls of stars. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with guests in formal wear, and Ethan's stomach clenched with renewed anxiety. "Miss Cross, No!" Her voice cut through his rising panic. "Whatever you're about to say, the answer is no. We're here. We're doing this, and you're going to walk in there with your head up, because anything less wastes the money you spent on that tuxedo." She reached for the door handle. "Ready?" Ethan took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. "No." "Good. The best performances are always uncomfortable." She opened the door and stepped out with fluid grace, and Ethan had no choice but to follow. The evening air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of expensive flowers and even more expensive perfume. Vivian was already moving toward the entrance, and Ethan hurried to catch up, acutely aware of the eyes turning their direction. The other guests were a study in wealth and pedigree, women in gowns that cost more than Ethan made in 6 months, men with the easy confidence that came from never having to prove their value. And here was Ethan Cole, executive secretary, arriving with the CEO of one of the city's most powerful corporations on his arm. Except she wasn't on his arm. Vivian maintained a precise 18 inches of distance, close enough to signal association, far enough to avoid assumption. They moved through the lobby like a unit, her presence creating a wake that parted the crowd with almost physical force. At the entrance to the ballroom, they were met by a young woman with a clipboard and a smile that was professionally bright and personally vacant. "Good evening. Name, please?" "Ethan Cole. +1. The woman's eyes flicked to Vivian, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. "Of course, Mr. Cole. Miss Cross. We weren't expecting, that is, we're honored to have you here, Miss Cross. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your seats." She led them into the ballroom, and Ethan's breath caught despite himself. The space was magnificent, a cathedral of glass and crystal, with chandeliers the size of small cars suspended from a ceiling painted to look like a twilight sky. Round tables draped in white linens filled the room, each topped with centerpieces that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. At the far end, a stage was set for the ceremony, framed by towering arrangements of white roses and orchids. And everywhere, people. Hundreds of them, dressed in their most expensive armor, talking in the particular cadence of the wealthy, voices low, laughter controlled, every gesture calibrated to communicate status without stating it. The young woman led them deeper into the ballroom, past tables numbered in ascending order. 3, 5, 7. Ethan watched the numbers climb and felt his stomach sink. 12, 13, 14. She walked past table 14 without stopping. Ethan glanced at Vivian, confused, but her expression revealed nothing. They continued forward, past tables he definitely wasn't supposed to be anywhere near, until they reached table 3, positioned just to the left of the stage with an unobstructed view of the proceedings. "Here we are," the woman said, gesturing to 2 empty seats. "Can I get you anything? Champagne? Water?" "We're fine," Vivian said, the dismissal clear in her tone. The woman left, and Ethan remained standing, staring at the place cards that read Ethan Cole and Vivian Cross in elegant calligraphy. "This isn't my table," he said quietly. "Tessa said I was at 14. "You were. I called ahead." Vivian settled into her chair with the composure of someone who'd never questioned her right to occupy any space. "Told them I required adequate sightlines for the ceremony and had particular seating needs. They accommodated." "You can't just—" "I can, and I did. Sit down, Mr. Cole. You're drawing attention." Ethan sat, feeling like he'd been picked up by a wave and deposited somewhere he didn't recognize. The other seats at their table were filling with guests he didn't know. Older couples with the bearing of inherited wealth, a woman in her 50s wearing enough diamonds to fund a small nation, a distinguished man who looked vaguely familiar in the way that powerful people often do. The woman in diamonds leaned toward Vivian with a smile that was more assessment than warmth. "Vivian Cross, I haven't seen you at a social event in months." "What brings you out of your tower?" "Supporting a colleague," Vivian said smoothly. "And you, Patricia? Still collecting board seats like some people collect stamps?" Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Always. Though I hear you've been doing quite a bit of collecting yourself. The Meridian merger, the Hanover acquisition, you're building quite an empire." "I prefer to think of it as strategic consolidation." They fell into conversation about market conditions and corporate maneuvering, speaking in a language Ethan understood intellectually but had never been fluent in. He sat quietly, trying to look like he belonged, hyper-aware of every gesture and expression. Across the room, he caught sight of Tessa. She was standing near the stage in her wedding gown, an elaborate confection of lace and silk that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary, surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers. She was laughing at something someone had said, her hand resting on Derek's arm with possessive intimacy, and she looked radiant, happy, like a woman who'd made exactly the right choices and was being rewarded for them. Then her eyes found Ethan, and her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Her gaze moved to Vivian, then to the table number, and Ethan watched understanding dawn in her expression. Her eyes narrowed just slightly before she turned away with deliberate grace. "She's noticed," Vivian murmured, not looking away from Patricia. "Good. Let her wonder." The next 30 minutes were a blur of arrivals and small talk. People kept gravitating toward their table, drawn by Vivian's presence like moths to a very expensive flame. Each time someone new approached, Vivian introduced Ethan with the same neutral phrase, "My colleague, Ethan Cole." No elaboration, no explanation. Just 5 words that somehow communicated both professional respect and personal boundary. And slowly, incrementally, Ethan felt something shift. The other guests started looking at him differently, not with pity or dismissal, but with curiosity. If Vivian Cross brought him to this wedding, if she seated herself at his table and introduced him as a colleague worth naming, then perhaps he was worth a second look. At 6 p.m. exactly, the lights dimmed and music swelled through hidden speakers. The ceremony was beginning. Ethan watched as Derek took his position at the altar, flanked by groomsmen who all had the polished look of men who'd never struggled with anything more serious than choosing between vacation homes. The officiant stepped forward, and the processional music began. Mia appeared first, walking down the aisle with careful steps, scattering rose petals with the concentrated focus of a child trying to get something exactly right. She was wearing a pale pink dress that made her look older than 8, her hair done up in curls that Tessa had probably spent hours perfecting. When she reached the front, her eyes scanned the crowd until they found Ethan. She waved, a small, uncertain gesture, and Ethan waved back, trying to pour every ounce of reassurance he had into the movement. Then she saw Vivian, and her eyes went wide with surprise. Vivian did something Ethan had never seen before. She smiled. Not the sharp, calculated expression she used in business, but something softer, almost warm. She gave Mia a small nod, and Mia's face broke into a genuine grin before she turned to take her place. The bridesmaids followed, then finally Tessa on her father's arm. She was objectively beautiful, moving down the aisle with the confidence of someone who'd choreographed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. But Ethan found himself watching her with something closer to anthropological curiosity than emotional investment. This was the woman he'd loved, the woman he'd built a life with, the woman who'd left him because he wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't hungry enough, wasn't enough. And sitting next to Vivian Cross, watching Tessa marry a man whose wealth could be measured in decimal points and real estate holdings, Ethan felt nothing. No heartbreak, no jealousy, no longing. Just a vague sense of relief that this chapter was finally, definitively closing. The ceremony proceeded with the usual rituals, vows that sounded meaningful but were ultimately just words, rings exchanged with practiced grace, pronouncements about love and commitment that the crowd received with polite applause. Ethan sat through it with the detached focus of someone watching a play he'd seen before. When the officiant pronounced them married and Derek kissed Tessa with the enthusiasm of a man claiming a prize, the room erupted in applause. Ethan clapped along with everyone else and found Vivian watching him with those 2 perceptive gray eyes. "You're doing well," she said quietly, barely audible over the noise. "I'm numb," Ethan admitted. Numbness is underrated. It's far preferable to most alternatives. The newly married couple made their way back down the aisle, and Tessa's eyes found Ethan's as she passed. There was something in her expression he couldn't quite read, surprise maybe, or calculation. She'd expected to see him alone and diminished. Instead, she'd found him seated at one of the best tables with the CEO of Cross Industries at his side. The math wasn't computing the way she'd anticipated, and Ethan took a savage pleasure in watching her try to recalculate. After the ceremony, there was a prescribed chaos as guests moved from the ballroom to the adjacent reception hall for cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Vivian navigated the crowd with practiced efficiency, and Ethan stayed close, using her like a shield against the social dynamics he'd never quite mastered. They were approached almost immediately by a man in his 60s wearing a tuxedo that probably cost $5,000 and an expression of carefully cultivated friendliness. "Vivian, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to see you here." "Richard?" Vivian's tone was cordial but contained. "I could say the same. I didn't realize you knew the Hayes family. Derek's firm handles some of our commercial properties. Good people, excellent instincts." Richard's eyes slid to Ethan with polite curiosity. "And you are?" "Ethan Cole," Vivian said before Ethan could answer. "My executive secretary." "Ah." Richard's expression shifted into something that looked like understanding but felt like judgment. "Well,
Any colleague of Vivian's is welcome company. Tell me, Ethan, how long have you been with Cross Industries? 5 years. 5 years. That's quite a tenure in Vivian's office. Most people don't last 6 months. Richard smiled, and there was teeth in it. You must be exceptionally competent or exceptionally patient. Both, Vivian said flatly.
If you'll excuse us, Richard, we were just about to get drinks. She steered Ethan away before Richard could respond, her hand on his elbow for exactly 3 seconds before releasing him. That was the CEO of Lansing Properties, she said, as they moved toward the bar. He's an ass, but a useful ass. Don't take anything he says personally. He thinks I'm your date. He thinks whatever narrative serves his curiosity. It doesn't matter what he thinks. They reached the bar, and Vivian ordered a vodka tonic with the efficiency of someone who'd ordered the same drink 1,000 times. What matters is that he now associates you with me, which means anyone he talks to tonight will hear about Ethan Cole, and when they Google you tomorrow, which they will, they'll find you're competent, employed, and connected. That's currency in this world. Ethan ordered a whiskey he didn't particularly want and tried to process what was happening. He'd expected tonight to be an exercise in survival. He hadn't expected it to feel like warfare, with Vivian as his general and every conversation a strategic engagement. A woman in a red dress approached them with the kind of calculated casualness that signaled intention. "Excuse me, are you Vivian Cross?" "I am." "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I had to say hello. I'm Jennifer Morrison. I work in mergers and acquisitions at Sterling Financial. I heard you speak at the Economic Summit last year, and your presentation on market consolidation was absolutely brilliant." Vivian accepted the compliment with a fractional nod. "Thank you. Are you enjoying the wedding?" "Oh, it's lovely. Tessa and Derek make such a beautiful couple." Jennifer's eyes moved to Ethan with bright curiosity. "And you are?" "Ethan Cole," Vivian said again, and Ethan was starting to understand the power of having someone else control his introduction. "My colleague. How wonderful. Do you work in finance as well?" "I'm Ms. Cross's executive secretary," Ethan said, and watched Jennifer's expression flicker with something that might have been surprise or might have been dismissal. "Oh, how interesting. That must be quite demanding." "It is," Vivian said, her voice carrying an edge. "Ethan runs my entire operation. Without him, I'd be significantly less effective. He's the kind of professional competence that's increasingly rare." Jennifer's smile brightened with genuine interest. "That's wonderful. It's so important to have strong support staff. I keep telling our partners they need to invest more in administrative excellence." They talked for another few minutes about the importance of organizational infrastructure, and Ethan stood quietly, watching Vivian systematically dismantle any assumption that his role was somehow lesser. By the time Jennifer excused herself, she was looking at Ethan with something approaching respect. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said once they were alone. "Do what?" "Defend my job, my role, make it sound like it matters. Mr. Cole, your job does matter. You coordinate the movement of millions of dollars in capital, manage relationships with some of the most demanding people in corporate America, and do it all with a level of precision that most people couldn't achieve if their lives depended on it. The fact that this society doesn't properly value administrative excellence is a failure of the society, not a reflection of the work." She took a sip of her drink. "Besides, I wasn't defending you. I was stating facts. If people choose to reassess their assumptions based on those facts, that's their cognitive evolution, not my charity." Before Ethan could respond, a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "Ethan, there you are!" He turned to find Tessa approaching, Derek at her side, both of them wearing smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. His ex-wife looked even more beautiful up close, her makeup flawless, her dress catching the light in ways that probably required a team of designers to achieve. Derek was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of effortless confidence that came from a lifetime of getting exactly what he wanted. "Tessa, Derek, congratulations." "Thank you. We're so glad you could make it. And you brought—" Tessa's eyes moved to Vivian, and there was calculation in her gaze. "Miss Cross, correct? I'm Tessa Hayes. Well, I'm Tessa Hayes now. This is my husband, Derek." "Congratulations on your marriage," Vivian said with perfect neutrality. "Thank you. I have to admit I was surprised when Ethan said he was bringing you. I didn't realize you two were—" Tessa let the sentence hang. Fishing. Colleagues, Vivian supplied. Ethan asked if I'd accompany him this evening, and I had the time available. How kind of you. Tessa's smile sharpened. Ethan didn't mention he was close enough with his boss to invite her to personal events. We maintain a professional relationship, Ethan said carefully. Miss Cross was generous enough. I don't do generosity, Vivian interrupted. I make time allocation decisions based on value assessment. Ethan is valuable, therefore his requests merit consideration. The words hung in the air like a declaration. Derek's expression shifted into something that might have been reassessment, and Tessa's smile went brittle around the edges. Well, Tessa said after a beat too long, we're thrilled you're both here. Ethan, I hope you don't mind, but we had to adjust your seating. The original table assignment wasn't quite... We're at table 3, Vivian said. The arrangements are acceptable. Tessa blinked. Table 3. But that was for Derek's business associates. How did... I called ahead, Vivian said calmly. I have particular requirements for event seating. Your planning staff was very accommodating. The subtext was clear. I'm Vivian Cross. I don't sit in the back. Derek laughed, a sound that was trying too hard to be easy. Well, we're honored to have you up front, Ms. Cross. Any friend of Ethan's is welcome at our wedding. I'm not his friend, Vivian corrected. I'm his employer and occasional social companion. The distinction matters. Ethan watched Tessa's face cycle through expressions, surprise, confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to jealousy. She'd orchestrated this wedding to be a demonstration of her triumph, her evolution from Ethan Cole's wife to Derek Hayes' partner. She'd expected Ethan to show up alone, diminished, a reminder of what she'd left behind. Instead, he'd arrived with a woman who commanded more respect in this room than Derek Hayes ever would, and the narrative was fragmenting in ways Tessa clearly hadn't anticipated. We should get back to our guests, Tessa said, her voice tight. But Ethan, I'm glad you're here. For Mia's sake. She was so worried you wouldn't come. I promised her I would. Yes? Well. Tessa's eyes flicked between Ethan and Vivian. We'll catch up more later. Enjoy the reception. They moved away, and Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was excruciating, he said quietly. That was strategic, Vivian corrected. She wanted to establish dominance. I declined the invitation. Now she's uncertain, which means she'll spend the rest of the evening trying to regain equilibrium instead of enjoying her wedding. Psychological warfare at its finest. You're terrifying. Thank you. I work very hard at it. She finished her drink and set the glass on a passing server's tray. How are you holding up? The question surprised him. Vivian didn't do emotional check-ins. I don't know. This is surreal. Most social theater is surreal. The question is whether you're surviving it. Because of you, Ethan said, and meant it. I couldn't have done this alone. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You could have. You'd have hated it, and it would have cost you more than it should, but you'd have survived. Humans are remarkably resilient when they have no other choice. That's not exactly inspiring. I'm not in the inspiration business, Mr. Cole. I'm in the efficiency business. And right now, the most efficient thing you can do is stop doubting yourself and start acting like you belong here. Before he could respond, a bell chimed, the signal that dinner was being served. The crowd began moving back toward the ballroom, and Vivian started walking without checking if Ethan was following. He hurried to catch up, and together they returned to table 3, where the other guests were already settling into their seats. Dinner was an elaborate affair. Multiple courses served by staff in crisp white uniforms, each played a work of art that seemed almost too beautiful to eat. Conversation flowed around Ethan in waves he only partially tracked. His attention split between the food, the speeches starting at the head table, and Mia, who kept looking over at him from her position near Tessa and Derek. Every time their eyes met, Ethan smiled, trying to communicate across the distance that everything was okay, that he was okay, that she didn't need to worry. And every time Mia smiled back, but there was uncertainty in her expression, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. The speeches began after the main course. Derek's best man told jokes that landed with practiced timing. Tessa's maid of honor delivered a toast about love and partnership that made half the room tear up, and Derek himself stood to thank everyone for coming.
his voice carrying the easy authority of someone used to being listened to.
Then he said something that made Ethan's stomach clench. I also want to acknowledge someone special tonight. Tessa's daughter, Mia, who's been so brave and gracious through all the changes in our family, and Mia's father, Ethan, who I know made the effort to be here tonight. Ethan, stand up for a second. Every eye in the room turned to table 3. Ethan felt his face flush hot as he slowly stood, trying to hold on to some shred of dignity. I know blended families can be complicated, Derek continued, his smile magnanimous, but I want Ethan to know that he'll always be welcome in our home. Mia needs her father, and we're committed to making sure that relationship stays strong. So Ethan, thank you for being here and for being such a dedicated dad. The room applauded, and Ethan stood there feeling like he'd been flayed open in front of 300 strangers. The subtext was clear to anyone paying attention. Derek Hayes was the generous victor, graciously acknowledging the defeated ex-husband, magnanimous in his triumph. Ethan sat down slowly, his hands shaking slightly. Vivian leaned toward him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Breathe. He just made himself look insecure. Anyone with emotional intelligence saw straight through that performance. He humiliated me. He tried to. There's a difference. Humiliation requires your participation, and you're not giving it to him. Her hand moved under the table, and for just a moment her fingers brushed against his, a gesture so quick and unexpected that Ethan almost thought he'd imagined it. You're still here. You're still standing. That's all that matters. The speeches continued, but Ethan barely heard them. His heart was hammering, his throat tight with anger and shame, and something else he couldn't quite name. He wanted to leave, to grab Mia and walk out of this ballroom and never look back. But Vivian's words echoed in his head. You're still standing, so he stayed. The dinner dragged on with the particular cruelty of events designed to celebrate what you'd lost. Each course arrived with choreographed precision, seared scallops, braised short rib, a palate cleanser that tasted like frozen regret, and Ethan moved food around his plate while the conversation at table 3 flowed around him like water around a stone. Patricia was holding court about some charity auction she'd organized, her voice carrying that peculiar frequency of wealth that made even generosity sound like an acquisition. Vivian participated minimally, offering observations so precise they bordered on surgical. She'd mastered the art of appearing engaged while remaining fundamentally detached, and Ethan watched her with something between admiration and envy. She belonged in rooms like this the way some people belonged in water, naturally without effort, as if she'd been designed for exactly this environment. Ethan, on the other hand, felt like he was drowning in expensive fabric. The cake cutting came after dessert, another choreographed moment where Tessa and Derek posed with a knife and a confection that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on a plate. Photographers swarmed, guests applauded, and somewhere in the midst of it all, Mia appeared at Ethan's elbow. "Daddy?" He turned to find his daughter standing there in her pink dress, her careful curls starting to come undone, her eyes uncertain. Ethan immediately pushed his chair back, creating space for her, and she climbed into his lap with the unselfconscious ease of a child who still believed her father could fix anything. "Hey, baby, you doing okay?" "Yeah, the cake is really good. Derek's mom gave me 2 pieces." Mia nestled against his chest, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling something loosen in his chest. This was real. This mattered. Everything else was just noise. Mia looked up at Vivian with those too perceptive eyes. "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" The question landed like a grenade in the middle of polite conversation. Patricia stopped mid-sentence, suddenly very interested in her wine glass. The distinguished man whose name Ethan had never caught developed a fascination with his napkin. Even the ambient noise of the ballroom seemed to dim, as if the entire room was leaning in to hear Vivian Cross's answer. Vivian looked at Mia with an expression Ethan had never seen before, something almost gentle, though calling it that felt like underselling the complexity. "No," Vivian said simply. "I'm your father's colleague. We work together, and sometimes we attend events together, like tonight." "Oh." Mia processed this with visible concentration. "Mom said Dad doesn't have a girlfriend because he works too much." "Your mother is partially correct. Your father does work extensively. However, the relationship between professional dedication and personal connection is more nuanced than simple causation. Vivian paused, seeming to recognize she was speaking to an 8-year-old rather than a board of directors. What I mean is, your dad works hard because he's good at what he does. That doesn't mean he can't have other things in his life. It just means he's being careful about what those things are. Mia tilted her head, studying Vivian with the intensity of a small scientist examining a new species. You talk fancy. I'm aware. It's a professional hazard. Do you like my dad? The question was asked with such innocent directness that Ethan felt his face flush. Mia, that's not... Your father is an exceptional professional, Vivian said, cutting him off. He's precise, anticipates needs before they're articulated, and maintains composure under pressure. Those are qualities I value highly. But do you like him? Mia pressed, apparently unsatisfied with corporate speak. Vivian was quiet for a moment, and Ethan watched something flicker across her face. Calculation, perhaps, or recognition of a question that couldn't be answered with strategic deflection. I respect him, Vivian said finally, which in my experience is more valuable than most things people call like. Mia seemed to accept this, nodding with the gravity of someone who'd received important information. She looked back at Ethan, her small hand coming up to touch his face with heartbreaking tenderness. You look sad, Daddy. I'm not sad, baby. I'm just tired. Derek made everyone clap for you. That was weird. Yes, it was. I don't think he's very nice. He smiles a lot, but his eyes don't smile, you know? Ethan did know. He pressed a kiss to the top of Mia's head, trying to communicate everything he couldn't say in a crowded ballroom. That he saw her, that he understood her, that she was the only thing in this entire circus that actually mattered. You should get back to your mom, sweetheart. She's probably looking for you. Okay? Mia climbed down from his lap, then turned back to Vivian with sudden determination. It was nice to meet you, Ms. Cross. Likewise, Mia. I hope you come to more things with my dad. He seems less nervous when you're here. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the crowd with the resilience of children who'd learned to navigate chaos. Ethan watched her go and felt something crack in the center of his chest, not breaking exactly, but shifting, like tectonic plates finding new alignment. Patricia cleared her throat delicately. What a charming child. She's perceptive, Vivian said, and there was something in her tone that suggested the conversation was over. The dancing began shortly after, the ballroom floor clearing as Tessa and Derek took their first dance to a song that had probably been selected by a wedding planner who specialized in emotional manipulation. They moved together with practiced grace, Derek leading with confidence, Tessa following with the kind of beauty that looked effortless but required extensive maintenance. Ethan watched them and felt nothing. No longing, no regret, no wish that he was the one holding her. Just a distant acknowledgement that this had been his life once, and now it wasn't. And the space between those two states was so vast it didn't bear examination. Other couples joined the dance floor, parents, wedding party members, guests who'd reached that perfect level of champagne consumption where dancing seemed like a good idea. The music shifted from romantic ballad to something more upbeat, and the energy in the room changed, becoming looser, more chaotic. Someone appeared at their table, a man in his 30s with the flushed face and bright eyes of someone who'd been enthusiastically enjoying the open bar. He wore a groomsman's boutonniere and a smile that was trying too hard to be friendly. Hey, you're Ethan, right? Tessa's ex? Ethan felt every muscle in his body tense. Yes. Brad Townsend. I work with Derek. Brad stuck out his hand and Ethan shook it because refusing would cause a scene. Brad's grip was too firm, too long, the handshake of someone trying to prove something. Man, I gotta say it's cool that you came tonight. Takes guts to show up to your ex-wife's wedding, you know? Most guys would be too proud. Mia wanted me here. Right, the kid, sweet girl. Derek talks about her all the time, about how he's gonna be such a great stepdad, give her all the opportunities she deserves. Brad leaned in conspiratorially, and Ethan could smell bourbon on his breath. Between you and me, I think Derek likes the idea of playing hero, you know? Rescuing the beautiful woman and her kid from whatever situation they were in before. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's hands curled into fists under the table. I'm sure Derek will be a fine stepfather, Ethan said carefully. Oh, absolutely. Guy's got everything. Money, connections, the big house in Riverside Park. Tessa really traded up, huh? Brad laughed, apparently unaware or uncaring that he was crossing every line of basic human decency. No offense, man. I'm sure you're doing fine. What do you do again? Derek mentioned something about admin work. I'm an executive secretary. Right, right. That's like you answer phones and stuff? Among other things. Cool, cool. Hey, that must be steady work at least, right? Benefits, retirement plan, all that boring but important stuff. Not exciting like what Derek does. Billion-dollar deals, schmoozing with politicians, but stable. That's good for a single dad, I bet. Ethan felt Vivian go very still beside him, the kind of stillness that preceded violence in nature documentaries. Mr. Townsend, Vivian said, her voice carrying the temperature of liquid nitrogen. You're drunk, tedious, and remarkably bad at reading social cues. I'd suggest you return to the bar before you embarrass yourself further. Brad's eyes widened as he seemed to notice Vivian for the first time. Whoa, hey, I didn't mean anything by it, just making conversation. Conversation requires reciprocity and basic intelligence. You've demonstrated neither. Leave. It wasn't a request. Brad's face cycled through several colors before settling on an ugly red. He looked at Ethan as if expecting support, found none, and retreated with the wounded dignity of a man who'd just discovered the world didn't revolve around him. The table had gone silent. Patricia was watching Vivian with unconcealed fascination, and the distinguished man had developed a sudden interest in the centerpiece. That was satisfying, Vivian said calmly, taking a sip of water. Though I suspect he'll complain to Derek, and Derek will feel obligated to address it, which may create downstream complications for you, Mr. Cole. I don't care, Ethan said, and realized he meant it. Thank you. Don't thank me. He was disrupting my evening with his pedestrian observations about career hierarchies. I was being selfish, not altruistic. But when she looked at him, Ethan saw something in her expression that suggested the truth was more complicated than her words allowed. The evening ground forward with relentless momentum. More dancing, more speeches, more champagne flowing like water, while the hired band played increasingly energetic covers of songs that had been popular a decade ago. Ethan moved through it in a state somewhere between presence and dissociation, responding when spoken to, smiling when appropriate, going through the motions of celebration while feeling like he was watching everything through glass. Around 9:30 p.m., as the party reached its peak chaos, Tessa appeared at their table again. She'd removed her veil and her makeup had started to show hairline cracks, but she still radiated that particular energy of a woman who'd achieved exactly what she set out to achieve. Ethan, can I talk to you for a minute? Privately? Vivian raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Ethan stood, following Tessa away from the table, through the crowd, and out onto a terrace that overlooked the city. The night air was cool and carried the distant sounds of traffic, a reminder that beyond this bubble of celebration, life continued with indifferent momentum. Tessa turned to face him, and in the dim light from the ballroom, she looked almost like the woman he'd married, younger, less polished, more uncertain. I wanted to thank you for coming tonight, she said. I know it wasn't easy. Mia wanted me here. I know. And you showed up for her. You always show up for her. Tessa's voice carried a weight he couldn't quite identify. Derek was right about one thing. You're a good father. That speech was humiliating, Tessa. I know. I told him not to do it, but Derek likes to be magnanimous. It's how he sees himself. She looked away, staring out at the city lights. He's a good man, Ethan. Different from you, but good in his own way. I'm happy for you. Are you? She turned back, studying his face with those analytical eyes that had once known him better than anyone. Because you don't look happy. You look, I don't know, distant, like you're somewhere else. I'm here. I'm present. That's what you asked for. And you brought your boss. There was something sharp in her tone now, the analytical edge returning. Vivian Cross, that was a surprise. You said I could bring a date. A date? Yes. Not the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the city. Do you have any idea what people have been saying? Half the room thinks you're sleeping with her, the other half thinks she's doing charity work. Ethan felt anger flare hot in his chest.
And which half do you believe? I don't know what to believe, Ethan. You show up with Vivian Cross on your arm. You're seated at table 3 like you're somebody important, and everyone's looking at you differently.
It's like you're trying to prove something. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm tired of being the footnote in your success story, Tessa. The guy you outgrew, the husband who wasn't ambitious enough, the executive secretary who answers phones. His voice was rising, and he didn't care. You wanted me here so Mia could see us being mature and healthy together. But what you really wanted was for me to show up alone and small so you could feel better about leaving me. Well, I'm sorry I didn't follow the script. Tessa's face had gone pale. That's not fair. None of this is fair. You left me because I was content with my job, because I wasn't hungry enough for wealth and status, because I didn't want to spend my life climbing ladders I didn't care about. And you know what? You were right to leave. We wanted different things. But don't stand here on your wedding night and make me feel bad for finally having someone see me as something other than inadequate. Is that what she does? Vivian Cross? She makes you feel adequate? The question landed like a punch. Ethan stared at his ex-wife and saw the real question underneath. Are you in love with her? She sees me as competent, Ethan said quietly, which is more than you ever did. Tessa flinched. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the sounds of the party drifting through the open doors like echoes from another world. I did see you as competent, Tessa said finally, her voice small. I just wanted more than competence. I wanted ambition, drive, the partnership where we both pushed each other to be better, bigger, more successful. And you were happy being exactly who you were. There's nothing wrong with that, Ethan, but it wasn't enough for me. I know. Do you hate me? The question surprised him. Ethan looked at Tessa, really looked at her, seeing past the wedding gown and the makeup and the performance of happiness to the woman underneath who'd once shared his bed and his dreams and his quiet mornings over coffee. No, he said honestly, I don't hate you. I think you did what you needed to do, and I'm doing what I need to do. And maybe that's the best we can hope for. Tessa nodded slowly, something like relief crossing her face. Mia adores you, you know. She was so nervous you wouldn't come tonight. I promised her I would. You always keep your promises. It's one of the things I loved about you. She reached out, touching his arm briefly. I should get back. Derek's probably wondering where I disappeared to. Congratulations on your marriage, Tessa. I mean that. She smiled, and for just a moment it reached her eyes. Thank you for being here, Ethan, even if it wasn't how I expected. She walked back inside, leaving Ethan alone on the terrace with the city spread out below him like a map of possibilities he'd never explored. He stood there for a long moment, letting the cool air clear his head, trying to process the strange cocktail of emotions churning in his chest. When he returned to the ballroom, he found Vivian exactly where he'd left her, engaged in what looked like a deeply tedious conversation with an elderly couple who'd apparently cornered her about investment strategies. She saw Ethan approaching, and her expression shifted into something that might have been relief on anyone else. If you'll excuse me, Vivian said to the couple with practiced politeness, my colleague has returned and we have matters to discuss. She stood and moved toward Ethan with fluid grace, creating a bubble of privacy in the crowded room simply by the force of her presence. How was the private conversation with your ex-wife? Illuminating. She's threatened by my presence here. Yes. Good. That was the point. Vivian studied his face with clinical precision. You look like you've been emotionally excavated. Do you need to leave? The question was asked without judgment, a simple assessment of operational capacity. Ethan found himself grateful for the directness. Soon. I want to say goodbye to Mia first. Acceptable. I'll meet you at the entrance in 15 minutes. She started to turn away, then paused, something flickering across her expression. Mr. Cole, for what it's worth, you handled yourself well tonight. Better than I anticipated. High praise from Vivian Cross. The highest I'm capable of giving. She almost smiled. Don't let it go to your head. Ethan found Mia near the dessert table, her face smeared with chocolate frosting, talking animatedly with another flower girl about something intensely important. When she saw Ethan, her entire face lit up. Daddy, did you try the chocolate cake? It's so good. I did, baby. It was delicious. Ethan knelt down to her level, bringing himself to her eye line. Hey, I'm going to head out soon, but I wanted to say goodbye first. Mia's face fell. Already? But the party's not over. I know, but it's getting late and you've got a big day tomorrow with your mom and Derek. I don't want to be in the way. You're never in the way. She threw her arms around his neck with fierce intensity. I'm glad you came, Daddy, even if Derek was weird about it. Me too, sweetheart. And I'll see you on Tuesday for our regular week, okay? Okay. She pulled back, looking at him seriously. Is Ms. Cross going to come to more things with you? I don't know, Mia. She's very busy. I hope she does. She's kind of scary, but I think she's nice underneath. Like how dragons are scary, but they protect treasure. Ethan couldn't help but laugh. That's actually a perfect description. Tell her I said goodbye. I will. One more hug, one more kiss on the forehead, and then Mia was running back to her friends, resilient in the way only children could be. Ethan watched her go and felt the familiar ache of loving someone so much it physically hurt. He found Vivian waiting at the entrance exactly as promised, her coat already on, her posture suggesting she'd been ready to leave for the past hour and was only remaining out of contractual obligation. Ready? She asked. Yes. They walked out together into the cool night, and Ethan felt like he was surfacing from deep water, breaking through into air after being submerged for hours. The black sedan was waiting at the curb, engine running, and they slid into the back seat with synchronized efficiency. As the car pulled away from the Grand View Hotel, Ethan watched the building recede in the rear window, all that glass and gold and manufactured elegance growing smaller until it was just another lit building in a city full of them. Thank you, he said quietly. For tonight. For all of it. You already thanked me. Don't become repetitive. I mean it, though. I couldn't have survived that without you. Vivian was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the passing city. When she spoke, her voice carried an unusual weight. Mr. Cole, I'm going to tell you something I rarely share, and I'd appreciate if you didn't make it weird. She turned to look at him directly. When I was 28, I attended my younger sister's wedding. She was marrying a man our parents adored, successful, well-connected, from the right family. I was already running my first company, already building what would become Cross Industries, and my entire family spent that wedding treating me like I was somehow defective because I'd chosen work over marriage, ambition over domesticity. Ethan stayed very still, sensing this was important. My sister's new in-laws asked what I did, and when I said I ran a tech company, they laughed. Thought I was joking. When they realized I was serious, they asked when I was going to settle down and find a real life, as if everything I'd built was just a hobby I'd abandon once the right man came along. That's awful. It was clarifying. I realized that to a certain subset of people, my accomplishments would always be measured against what I hadn't achieved: marriage, children, the performance of conventional femininity. And I decided that night that I would never again put myself in a position where my value was determined by someone else's narrow definition of success. She looked at him with those gray eyes that saw everything. Tonight, watching you navigate that ballroom, watching you hold your head up while people tried to make you feel small because you're just a secretary, because you're just a single dad, because you didn't marry up or cash out or whatever metric they use to measure worth, I saw someone refusing to accept a narrative that diminished him. That's not something I expected, and it's something I respect deeply. Ethan felt his throat tighten. I only managed because you were there. You managed because you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. I just provided strategic support. She paused. Though I will admit, there was a certain satisfaction in watching Tessa Hayes realize her ex-husband has allies she didn't account for. You enjoyed that. Immensely. I'm petty that way. They sat in comfortable silence as the car navigated through evening traffic. The city passed by in streaks of neon and shadow, and Ethan felt something settling in his chest. Not resolution exactly, but the beginning of it. The night had been excruciating and surreal and occasionally transcendent, and he'd survived it. More than survived. He'd walked out with his dignity intact, which was more than he'd hoped for going in. The car pulled up outside Ethan's apartment building, and the driver put it in park. Ethan reached for the door handle, then paused. Miss Cross. Vivian. Can I ask you something? You can ask? I may not answer.
Why did you really come tonight? And please don't say it was about protecting your investment in my professional stability. Vivian was quiet for so long that Ethan thought she might not respond at all. Then she spoke, her voice carrying a vulnerability he'd never heard before. Because you asked, Mr. Cole. In 5 years, you have never once asked me for anything personal.
You've never presumed on our professional relationship, never tried to leverage proximity into intimacy, never confused competence with entitlement. And when you finally did ask, when you were desperate enough and brave enough to request my presence at an event that was clearly going to be painful, I found I couldn't say no. Because people who never ask for anything deserve to be helped when they finally do. She looked at him directly, and Ethan saw something in her expression that looked almost like caring, though calling it that felt reductive. Also, I was curious. You're an enigma, Ethan Cole. Brilliant at your job, but seemingly content to remain invisible. Devoted father, but divorced from the mother. Capable of extraordinary competence, but unwilling to capitalize on it. I wanted to see you in a context where those contradictions might make sense. And did they? Make sense? Some of them. Others became more interesting. She reached for her own door handle. Good night, Mr. Cole. I'll see you Monday morning. Coffee at 187 degrees, sans serif fonts at 11 point, and please adjust my afternoon schedule to accommodate the Hanover call that will inevitably run over. Yes, Ms. Cross. Ethan climbed out of the car and Vivian did the same from her side. She stood on the sidewalk in her black gown and expensive coat, looking absurdly elegant against the backdrop of his modest apartment building. Thank you, Ethan said one more time, unable to help himself. You're welcome, Vivian said, and the words carried weight he didn't know how to measure. Now go inside before I regret my temporary lapse into sentimentality. She got back into the car, and Ethan watched the sedan pull away, its taillights disappearing into traffic. He stood there for a long moment, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of the world, though he couldn't quite articulate what. Finally, he went inside, climbed the stairs to his apartment, and let himself into the quiet space he shared with Mia. The silence felt different somehow, less lonely, more expectant, like it was waiting for something to happen. Ethan hung up his tuxedo, washed his face, and lay down in bed fully expecting to replay the entire evening in excruciating detail. Instead, he fell asleep almost immediately and dreamed of nothing at all. Sunday arrived with the kind of stillness that felt almost unnatural after the chaos of the previous night. Ethan woke at 7 a.m., late for him, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind refusing to settle on any single thought. The wedding felt like something that had happened to someone else, a story he'd heard rather than lived through. He could remember the details with crystalline clarity, the chandeliers, the speeches, Vivian's hand briefly touching his under the table, but they all felt distant, like memories viewed through frosted glass. He got up, made coffee, and sat at his kitchen table scrolling through his phone without really seeing what was on the screen. No messages from Tessa, which was expected. No messages from Vivian, which was also expected, but somehow disappointing in a way he didn't want to examine. What he did have was a text from an unknown number that had come in at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. Mr. Cole, driver will deliver a package to your building at 9 a.m. Sunday. Accept it. VC. Ethan stared at the message, trying to decode what kind of package would warrant Vivian Cross using her personal time to coordinate a Sunday delivery. At exactly 9 a.m., his building's intercom buzzed. Delivery for Ethan Cole. I'll be right down. The lobby was empty except for a delivery driver holding a large flat box wrapped in brown paper. Ethan signed for it, carried it back upstairs, and set it on his kitchen table with the careful reverence of someone handling potential explosives. Inside was the tuxedo he'd worn to the wedding, professionally cleaned and pressed, along with a small envelope. The note inside was handwritten in Vivian's precise script. You paid too much for this suit to wear it once. Consider it an investment in future occasions that require armor. The cleaning bill has been handled. Don't argue. VC Ethan sat down slowly, holding the note, and felt something warm and complicated unfold in his chest. It was such a small gesture, returning a cleaned suit, but it carried the weight of consideration, of someone thinking about him in a moment when they didn't have to. He picked up his phone and typed, "Thank you, Ms. Cross. This was unnecessary but deeply appreciated. The response came back 3 minutes later. Everything unnecessary is deeply appreciated. That's what separates survival from living. See you tomorrow. Coffee. 187 degrees. Ethan smiled despite himself and set the phone down. The rest of Sunday stretched ahead of him with empty hours to fill. Normally, Mia would be home, providing structure and purpose to his weekend. But she was with Tessa and Derek for their post-wedding brunch and whatever other rituals newlyweds performed. Ethan tried to read, tried to watch television, tried to do laundry with the focused intensity of someone avoiding their own thoughts. It didn't work. By evening, he'd given up on productivity and was sitting on his couch with a beer he wasn't really drinking when his phone rang. Mia's face appeared on the screen, the photo he'd taken of her at the zoo last summer, grinning with ice cream on her nose. "Hey, baby, how was your day?" "It was okay." Mia's voice had that careful quality she used when she was trying not to upset anyone. "We had brunch at Derek's club, and everyone was really dressed up, and they had this fancy egg thing that tasted weird." "Eggs Benedict?" "Maybe. It had yellow sauce. Mom said I should try it because Derek's parents were there, and I should be polite, but I didn't like it very much." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't have to eat things you don't like, sweetheart, even to be polite." "I know, but..." She trailed off, and Ethan heard voices in the background. Tessa's laugh, Derek's deeper rumble. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you leave early last night? Did something bad happen?" "No, baby. Nothing bad. I just thought you should have time with your mom and Derek without me there. It was their special night." "Oh." She sounded unconvinced. "Some people were saying stuff about you and Ms. Cross, about how she's your boss, and it was weird that she came." Ethan closed his eyes, hating that Mia had been exposed to adult gossip, hating that she was learning to navigate social politics at 8 years old. "What people said that?" "I don't know their names. Some ladies talking by the bathroom. They said you were probably dating her to get a promotion or something." Her voice went small. "That's not true, right? You said she was just a friend." "She is a friend, Mia, and a colleague. And the people who are saying that stuff don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes adults say mean things because they don't understand a situation, or because they want to feel important by knowing secrets, even when those secrets aren't real. That's dumb." "Yes, it is. I liked her, though. Miss Cross. She talked to me like I was a real person, not like a little kid. And she was nice to you." Mia paused. "Are you going to see her again?" "I work for her, baby. I see her every day." "No, I mean, not at work, like how you saw her at the wedding." Ethan didn't know how to answer that. The truth was, he had no idea what Saturday night meant in the larger context of his relationship with Vivian Cross. It had been a transaction, she'd said so explicitly, but transactions didn't usually come with clean tuxedos and handwritten notes about survival versus living. "I don't know, Mia. Miss Cross is a very private person and she's very busy. Last night was a special circumstance." "Oh, okay." She sounded disappointed, and Ethan felt a flicker of concern. The last thing he needed was Mia developing fantasies about Vivian becoming some kind of mother figure. That path led nowhere good. "I love you, sweetheart. I'll see you Tuesday, okay?" "Okay. Love you too, Daddy." The line went dead, and Ethan sat in the growing darkness of his apartment, thinking about perception and reality and the dangerous space between them. Monday morning arrived with its usual demands. Ethan was at his desk by 6:30 a.m., earlier than necessary, needing the familiar ritual of preparation to ground himself. He went through Vivian's schedule with meticulous attention, flagged the 3 items that would require immediate attention, and made coffee at exactly 187 degrees. Vivian arrived at 6:47 a.m. as always. She paused at his desk for exactly the same 3 seconds she always did, accepting the coffee with a fractional nod. "Mr. Cole." "Ms. Cross, your briefing materials are ready." "Acceptable." She turned toward her office, then stopped. "The tuxedo was returned in satisfactory condition?" "Yes, thank you for that. It was very considerate. It was practical. You'll need it for the Hanover dinner next month, and I prefer my staff to look competent rather than shabby." She continued into her office without waiting for a response, the door closing behind her with quiet finality. And just like that, they were back to normal. Professional distance, efficient communication. the carefully maintained boundaries that had defined their relationship for 5 years. Ethan told himself he was relieved. This was familiar territory, safe and predictable. The wedding had been an aberration, a single night outside the normal parameters of their interaction. Except it didn't feel normal. Throughout the morning, Ethan caught himself watching Vivian through her office window, looking for some sign that Saturday night had shifted something fundamental between them. But she was exactly as she always was, focused, precise, demanding excellence with every interaction. When she called him in to discuss the Meridian contracts, she was all business. When she sent him to deal with a crisis in accounting, her instructions were clear and emotionless. By noon, Ethan had convinced himself he'd imagined any deeper significance to their conversation in the car. Vivian had done him a favor, he'd thanked her, and now they were moving forward exactly as they had before. It was clean, professional, and entirely reasonable. He was reviewing the afternoon schedule when his desk phone rang. Ethan Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Jennifer Morrison. We met at the wedding Saturday night. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. Yes, I remember. How can I help you, Miss Morrison? I wanted to reach out because I was very impressed by our conversation about administrative excellence and organizational infrastructure. I'm actually in the process of restructuring our executive support team at Sterling Financial, and I'd love to talk to you about potentially joining our organization. The words took a moment to register. I'm sorry, are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a conversation that could lead to a job offer, yes. We're looking for someone with your level of expertise to overhaul our executive support systems. And frankly, anyone who can work with Vivian Cross for 5 years has skills we desperately need. Jennifer's voice was warm, professional, persuasive. The position would come with a significant salary increase. I'm thinking 30% above your current compensation and a title upgrade to Director of Executive Operations. You'd have your own team, real decision-making authority, the works. Yet Ethan felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. 30%. A title and his own team. The kind of opportunity that people like him weren't supposed to get. Miss Morrison, I'm flattered, but I'm very happy in my current position. Are you? Or are you comfortable? There's a difference, Mr. Cole. Look, I'm not trying to poach you unethically. I just think you're someone with exceptional talent who might benefit from a conversation about what else is possible. No pressure, no commitment, just coffee and a discussion about your career trajectory. Her words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Was he happy or just comfortable? Had he built a career or just found a safe place to hide? I appreciate the offer, Ethan said carefully. Can I think about it? Of course. Here's my direct number. Call me when you're ready to talk. And Mr. Cole, whatever you decide, know that you made an impression Saturday night. Vivian Cross doesn't bring just anyone to high-profile events. The fact that she brought you says something significant about your value. The call ended, and Ethan sat staring at the phone number Jennifer had given him, feeling like he'd just been handed a map to a country he'd never considered visiting. The afternoon proceeded with mechanical efficiency until 3:47 p.m., when Vivian's door opened and she stood in the threshold with an expression Ethan had learned to recognize as controlled displeasure. Mr. Cole. A moment. He followed her into her office, and she closed the door behind them. Never a good sign. I received a call from Jennifer Morrison at Sterling Financial 30 minutes ago, Vivian said without preamble. She wanted to inform me, as a professional courtesy, that she's attempting to recruit you for a position in her organization. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Ms. Cross, I didn't encourage... I'm aware. Jennifer is ambitious and occasionally predatory in her talent acquisition strategies. What I want to know is whether you're considering her offer. The question was delivered with Vivian's usual precision, but Ethan heard something underneath it. Not quite vulnerability, but something closer to genuine curiosity than she usually allowed. I don't know, he admitted. She called an hour ago. I haven't had time to process it. Then let me help you process. Vivian moved to her desk, her posture rigid. Jennifer Morrison is offering you a title and a salary increase in exchange for implementing the systems I've spent 5 years training you to maintain. She's not investing in your potential, Mr. Cole. She's attempting to purchase my intellectual property through the proxy of my employee. That's not fair. She was impressed by our conversation at the wedding. She was impressed by the fact that you survived 5 years working for me. which signals resilience, competence, and the ability to operate under extreme pressure. All valuable traits that I cultivated through rigorous professional standards. Vivian's gray eyes were sharp. Don't mistake opportunism for recognition, Mr. Cole. Jennifer Morrison sees you as a shortcut to efficiency gains she doesn't want to build herself. Ethan felt anger spark in his chest. And what do you see me as, Miss Cross? Because for 5 years, I've been your secretary, your assistant, the person who makes your coffee and manages your calendar and anticipates your needs like some kind of highly educated mind reader. And now someone is offering me a chance to be more than that, to have my own team, my own authority, my own career trajectory. And you're telling me it's just opportunism? The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Is that how you see yourself? She asked quietly. As just a secretary? That's what I am. That's your title. It's not what you are. She moved around the desk, eliminating the physical barrier between them. You are the operational backbone of a multi-billion-dollar organization. You manage relationships with board members who could destroy careers with a phone call. You coordinate logistics for deals that affect thousands of jobs. You are the reason I can focus on strategy instead of drowning in administrative chaos. The fact that your business card says executive secretary instead of chief of staff or director of operations is a failure of corporate nomenclature, not a reflection of your actual value. Ethan stared at her, trying to reconcile this assessment with the careful invisibility he'd cultivated for years. Then why haven't you promoted me? Given me a title that reflects that value? Vivian was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried an unusual weight. Because I'm selfish, Mr. Cole. Because the moment I give you a title that accurately reflects your contributions, you become visible to people like Jennifer Morrison. You become a target for recruitment, a commodity to be acquired, and I would lose the one person who makes my professional life functional. She paused. I've been protecting my investment by keeping you deliberately undervalued, which I'm now realizing was remarkably short-sighted. The admission hit Ethan like a physical blow. All this time, he'd assumed his invisibility was his own choice, his own preference for staying small and safe. The idea that Vivian had been actively maintaining it, protecting her investment by suppressing his market value, was both infuriating and strangely validating. So what are you saying? That I should stay because you need me? I'm saying you should stay if this work fulfills you, if it challenges you, if it allows you to exercise skills you value, if it provides the life you want for yourself and your daughter. Vivian's expression softened fractionally. But I'm also saying that if you choose to leave, I'll write you a recommendation that will open every door in this city. Because, despite my selfishness, I respect you too much to trap you in a position that doesn't serve your growth. Ethan felt something crack in his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door he'd kept locked for years. I need to think about this. Of course. Take whatever time you need. Vivian returned to her desk, the moment of vulnerability already receding. But Mr. Cole, Saturday night, when you asked me to attend that wedding, you demonstrated something I rarely see, the courage to ask for what you need instead of accepting what you're given. Don't lose that courage now. Whatever you decide about Jennifer Morrison's offer, make sure it's what you actually want, not what you think you're supposed to want. Ethan left her office feeling like he'd been simultaneously praised and challenged, supported and pushed, in a way that only Vivian Cross could manage. He returned to his desk and stared at Jennifer Morrison's phone number, then at the door to Vivian's office, then at the city beyond the windows. For the first time in 5 years, he had choices, and the weight of them was terrifying. The rest of the week passed in a strange, suspended state. Ethan went through the motions of his job with his usual competence, but his mind was elsewhere, cycling through scenarios and calculations. Jennifer Morrison called twice more, each time sweetening the offer. Better benefits, flexible schedule, the promise of real career advancement. Each time Ethan told her he was still considering. Vivian, for her part, said nothing more about it. Their interactions remained professional, efficient, exactly as they'd always been. But sometimes Ethan would catch her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, and he wondered if she was preparing for the moment when he'd walk into her office and give notice. Tuesday afternoon, Mia came home from Tessa and Derek's with a new backpack. Designer, expensive, completely unnecessary. and stories about Derek's house that she told with the careful neutrality of a child trying not to hurt anyone's feelings. It's really big, Daddy, like so big you could get lost. And they have a pool in the backyard, and Derek says maybe we can have pool parties in the summer.
That sounds nice, baby. Yeah. She set the backpack down carefully, like it might break. Mom says Derek wants to get me a tutor for math, someone who comes to the house and helps me with homework. Do you need help with math?
I don't think so. I mean, I got a B on my last test, but Mom says Derek's kids went to private school and had tutors, and that's why they're so successful now. She looked up at him with those two wise eyes. Am I supposed to go to private school? Ethan felt his chest tighten. Do you want to go to private school? I like my school. My friends are there. Then you're staying at your school, Mia. You're doing great exactly where you are. She nodded, but Ethan could see the uncertainty in her expression. Tessa and Derek were building a life of private schools and tutors and pool parties, and Mia was caught in the middle, trying to navigate the gap between her two worlds. That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan sat in his kitchen and looked at Jennifer Morrison's number one more time. 30% salary increase. His own team, a title that reflected his actual contributions. The ability to give Mia opportunities that matched what Tessa and Derek could provide. It should have been an easy decision. He picked up his phone and dialed before he could second-guess himself. Jennifer Morrison. Ms. Morrison, this is Ethan Cole. I've thought about your offer, and I'd like to have that conversation. They scheduled coffee for Friday morning. Ethan hung up and sat in the silence of his apartment, waiting to feel something. Excitement, relief, certainty. Instead, he just felt hollow. Friday arrived with gray skies and the threat of rain. Ethan had taken a personal morning, leaving Vivian a note that he had an appointment and would be in by noon. He met Jennifer Morrison at a coffee shop in the financial district, a place filled with people in expensive suits making deals over espresso. Jennifer was impressive in person, sharp, confident, selling a vision of what Ethan could become if he just took the leap. She walked him through the organizational structure at Sterling Financial, the problems they were trying to solve, the authority he'd have to implement solutions. You'd essentially be building your own kingdom, she said, leaning forward with enthusiasm. Your team, your systems, your vision, and the salary is just the starting point. There's real room for growth here, Ethan. You could make director in 2 years, VP in 5. The ceiling is as high as your ambition. It was everything he should want. Everything Tessa had wanted him to want. Everything that made sense on paper. Can I ask you something honestly? Ethan said. Why me? There are hundreds of executive assistants in this city with comparable experience. Jennifer smiled. Because Saturday night, I watched you sit at a table with some of the most powerful people in this city, and you didn't shrink. You didn't apologize for being there. You held your ground with quiet confidence, and when Vivian Cross introduced you as her colleague, she meant it. That's not something you can teach, Ethan. That's intrinsic value. And if I take this job, if I leave Vivian, what happens to my relationship with her? Professionally, I mean. Honestly, it'll probably be tense for a while. Vivian doesn't like losing valuable assets. But she's also a pragmatist. She'll understand that this is a business decision, and eventually you might even do business together. Cross industries and Sterling Financial work in adjacent spaces, there could be opportunities for collaboration. Ethan nodded, processing this. Everything Jennifer said made sense. It was logical, strategic, the smart career move. I need a few more days to think about it, he heard himself say. Jennifer's smile tightened fractionally. Of course, but Ethan, opportunities like this don't stay open forever. I can give you until Monday, but after that, I'll need to move forward with other candidates. They shook hands and parted ways, and Ethan stood on the sidewalk in the cold morning air, feeling like he was standing at a crossroads without a map. He arrived at the office at 11:47 a.m. to find Vivian's door closed and her calendar blocked for a private call. Her assistant, a nervous young woman named Claire who'd been hired to handle overflow work, looked up at Ethan with obvious relief. Oh, thank goodness you're here. Ms. Cross has been asking for you every 15 minutes since 9 a.m. Something about the Meridian contracts needing immediate revision. Ethan felt guilt spike in his chest. He'd left Vivian without coverage on a day when she clearly needed him, chasing an opportunity that would require him to leave her permanently. He settled at his desk and pulled up the Meridian files, immediately spotting the 3 issues that would have triggered Vivian's concern. He drafted the revisions, sent them to legal, and was coordinating the follow-up when Vivian's door opened. "Mr. Cole, my office, now." He followed her inside, and she closed the door with more force than necessary. "Where were you this morning?" "I had a personal appointment. I left a note. I saw the note. I'm asking where you were." Her eyes were sharp, assessing. "And before you answer, know that I already know. Jennifer Morrison's assistant called to confirm your meeting location, and the call was accidentally routed to my line instead of yours." Ethan felt his face flush. "Ms. Cross, you're interviewing for positions at Sterling Financial." It wasn't a question. "You're seriously considering leaving." "I'm considering my options." "Your options?" Vivian's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Mr. Cole, do you want to know what I did this morning while you were having coffee with Jennifer Morrison? I restructured your employment contract, drafted a new position, Chief of Staff, Cross Industries, with a salary increase of 40%, full benefits expansion, and equity options that vest over 4 years. I was planning to present it to you this afternoon." Ethan felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. "You were going to promote me. I was going to offer you what you're worth. What I should have offered you years ago instead of hoarding your talent like some kind of corporate dragon sitting on treasure." She moved to her desk, pulling out a folder. "This is the contract. Read it, review it with a lawyer if you want, and then decide if Jennifer Morrison's offer is really better than what I'm prepared to give you." Ethan took the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside was everything Vivian had promised: a job title that reflected his actual role, compensation that would change his life, and a benefits package that would secure Mia's future in ways he'd only fantasized about. "Why now?" he asked. "Why not last month, last year, 3 years ago?" "Because I'm a coward, Mr. Cole." Vivian's voice was quiet, stripped of its usual armor. "'Cause as long as I kept you in a position titled secretary, I could maintain the fiction that you were replaceable, that if you left I could simply hire another competent assistant and continue as before. But Saturday night, watching you navigate that wedding with grace under pressure, seeing you step into spaces you'd normally avoid, recognizing that you've been operating below your capacity because I made it comfortable for you to do so, it became clear that I've been doing both of us a disservice." She sat down, and for the first time since Ethan had known her, Vivian Cross looked uncertain. "I need you, Ethan. Not just as an assistant, but as a partner in running this organization. And if the only way to keep you is to finally acknowledge that reality with appropriate compensation and authority, then that's what I should have done years ago." Ethan stared at the contract, then at Vivian, trying to reconcile this moment with every assumption he'd built about their relationship. "And if I still choose Sterling Financial? Then I'll be disappointed, but I'll respect your decision. I'll write you the recommendation I promised, and I'll wish you well." "But Ethan," she looked at him directly, "don't choose based on what you think you're supposed to want. Don't choose based on what Tessa wanted for you or what society says success should look like. Choose based on what actually makes you want to get up in the morning." The weight of the decision pressed down on Ethan's shoulders like physical force. 2 offers, 2 futures, 2 completely different versions of what his life could become. "I need the weekend," he said quietly, "to think about this, to really think. Take it. The offer stands until Monday morning. After that," Vivian trailed off, "after that, we'll both know what we're working with." Ethan left her office and returned to his desk, the contract feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks performed with mechanical precision while his mind spiraled through scenarios and calculations. At 5:30 p.m., Vivian emerged from her office with her coat and briefcase. "I'm leaving early," she said, and Ethan realized he'd never once seen her leave before 7 p.m. "Have a good weekend, Mr. Cole. Whatever you decide, know that working with you has been—" She paused, searching for words. "It's been the most efficient professional partnership I've ever maintained." "High praise from Vivian Cross," Ethan said, echoing his words from the wedding. "The highest I'm capable of giving." She almost smiled. "Don't let it go to your head." Then she was gone, leaving Ethan alone in the quiet office with 2 futures spread before him like maps to different countries. He sat there until the cleaning crew arrived, then finally went home to Mia and the small life they'd built together, knowing that by Monday morning he'd have to choose which version of himself he wanted to become. The weekend stretched ahead of Ethan like uncharted territory. He spent Saturday morning with Mia at the park, pushing her on swings and watching her climb playground equipment with the fearless confidence of children who haven't yet learned that falling hurts. She chattered about school and friends and the pool party Derek was planning for her birthday, and Ethan listened with half his attention while the other half cycled endlessly through the impossible mathematics of his decision. Sterling Financial represented everything he'd been told to want: advancement, recognition, the validation that came from a title that matched his contributions. It was the choice Tessa would have celebrated, the choice that proved he'd finally developed ambition, finally stopped being content with invisible competence. But Cross Industries, staying with Vivian, that felt like something else entirely. It felt like being seen, not for what he could become, but for what he already was.
Daddy, you're not listening. Mia stood in front of him with her hands on her hips, a perfect miniature of Tessa's disapproving stance. I'm sorry, baby. What did you say? I asked if Miss Cross is your friend now, like a real friend, not just a work friend. Ethan pulled Mia onto the bench beside him, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Why do you ask? Because you've been different since the wedding. Not bad different, just, I don't know, like you're thinking about something important. She looked up at him with those eyes that saw too much. And you get this look when you talk about her. Like how I look when I talk about Emily from school, and I'm trying to figure out if she's my best friend or just a regular friend. The comparison was so innocent and so accurate that Ethan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Ms. Cross is important to me, he said carefully. She's someone I respect very much, and someone who's been kind to me in ways I didn't expect. But our relationship is complicated, Mia. We work together, which means there are boundaries we have to maintain. What's boundaries? Rules about what's appropriate and what's not, like how you can't eat dessert before dinner, even if you really want to. Mia wrinkled her nose. That's a dumb rule. Maybe, but sometimes rules exist for good reasons, even when they're frustrating. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other families navigate the weekend rituals of parenthood. Ethan saw himself reflected in the other single parents, the ones checking their phones between playground supervision, the ones who looked perpetually tired, the ones doing their best with resources that never quite stretched far enough. Are you going to leave your job? Mia asked suddenly. Ethan startled. What makes you think that? I heard you on the phone Thursday night. You were talking to someone about a new job with more money. She looked worried. If you get a new job, will you have to work more? Will I see you less? The question cut straight to the heart of what Ethan had been avoiding. More money meant more hours, more responsibility, more time away from the one person who actually mattered. He'd spent 5 years building a life that prioritized Mia, that gave him flexibility to be present for school plays and sick days and the 1,000 small moments that comprised childhood. Was he really prepared to sacrifice that for a title and a salary increase? I'm thinking about my options, Ethan said honestly. But I promise you, Mia, whatever I decide, you come first, always. If a job means I see you less, then it's not the right job, no matter how much money they offer. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and ran back to the swings. Ethan watched her go and felt something crystallize in his mind. He'd been approaching this decision like a business problem, weighing compensation and career trajectory and professional growth. But the real question wasn't which job offered more. It was which job allowed him to be the person he wanted to be. And that person was Mia's father first, everything else second. Sunday evening, after Mia was in bed, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with both contracts spread before him. Jennifer Morrison's offer from Sterling Financial, with its impressive title and 45% salary increase. Vivian's offer from Cross Industries, with slightly less money but equity options and the promise of true partnership. On paper, Sterling Financial won. But paper didn't account for the way Vivian had shown up to Tessa's wedding when she had absolutely no obligation to do so. Paper didn't account for the clean tuxedo and the handwritten note. Paper didn't account for 5 years of learning to speak each other's language, of building trust through small daily demonstrations of competence and respect. Ethan picked up his phone and called Jennifer Morrison's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail.
Ms. Morrison, this is Ethan Cole. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity you've presented, but after careful consideration, I've decided to remain with Cross Industries. I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, and I wish you the best in finding the right candidate for your organization. He hung up and sat very still, waiting to feel regret or doubt. Instead, he felt relief, like he'd been holding his breath for days and could finally exhale. The hard part was over. Now, he just had to tell Vivian. Monday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine that felt like mockery of Ethan's nervous energy. He was at his desk by 6:15 a.m., earlier than even his usual early, needing the routine to ground him. He made coffee at 187 degrees, prepared Vivian's briefing materials with obsessive precision, and tried not to watch the clock as it crept towards 6:47. Vivian arrived exactly on time, as always. She paused at his desk, accepted the coffee, and their eyes met for a fraction of a second longer than usual. Mr. Cole, good morning. Ms. Cross, your schedule is ready, and I've flagged the 3 items requiring immediate attention. Thank you. She turned toward her office, then stopped. I assume you've made your decision regarding the employment offers? Yes. And? Ethan stood, the signed contract from Cross Industries in his hand. I'd like to accept your offer, Ms. Cross. Chief of Staff position pending review of the final terms. Something shifted in Vivian's expression. Not quite relief, but a softening around the eyes that suggested she'd been prepared for a different answer. She took the contract from him, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Acceptable. I'll have legal finalize the paperwork this week. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried unusual warmth. Welcome to your new position, Mr. Cole. Try not to let the authority go to your head. I'll do my best, Ms. Cross. I expect nothing less. She started toward her office again, then turned back one more time. And Ethan? Thank you. For staying. For choosing this partnership over the easier path. It was the first time in 5 years she'd called him by his first name. The morning proceeded with unusual lightness, as if the decision had lifted some invisible weight from both of them. Vivian was almost cheerful, or at least her version of cheerful, which meant she only corrected him twice and actually acknowledged when he anticipated her needs, with a fractional nod that might have been approval. At 11:30 a.m., Ethan's phone rang. Tessa. He stepped into the hallway before answering, suddenly aware that his relationship with his ex-wife was about to shift in ways he couldn't fully predict. Tessa, what can I do for you? Ethan, hi. I wanted to call because Derek and I have been talking, and we think it might be good for Mia if we adjusted the custody arrangement. Her voice had that careful quality she used when delivering news she knew wouldn't be well received. Nothing dramatic, just maybe shifting to a schedule where she's with us during the week for school, and you get extended weekends. That way she'd be in the same school district as Derek's kids, and she could participate in after-school activities without the commute. Ethan felt cold rage crystallize in his chest. You want to take primary custody. I want to give Mia more stability and opportunities, Ethan. Derek's house is in the best school district in the city. She'd have access to resources, tutors, a peer group that's college-focused. I'm not trying to take her away from you. I'm trying to set her up for success. She's 8 years old, Tessa. She doesn't need a college-focused peer group. She needs stability, routine, and parents who put her emotional well-being above their ambitions. That's not fair. Derek and I are thinking about her future. You're thinking about how it looks to have a daughter in the right schools with the right friends. You're building a life that photographs well, and you want Mia to be a prop in that picture. Ethan's voice was rising, and he didn't care. The answer is no. The custody arrangement stays as it is. If you want to pursue this legally, I'll fight you every step of the way. There was silence on the other end, and when Tessa spoke again, her voice was tight with anger. You're being unreasonable. I'm offering Mia advantages you could never provide on a secretary's salary. Chief of Staff, Ethan corrected. As of this morning. Chief of Staff at Cross Industries, with a compensation package that matches the value I bring to the organization. So you can stop using my income as ammunition for why you'd be a better primary parent. Another silence, longer this time. You got promoted. Tessa's voice had shifted, becoming calculating. When? That's not relevant to this conversation. What's relevant is that Mia is happy, healthy, and thriving with our current arrangement. If you want to offer her opportunities, tutors, activities, whatever. I'm happy to discuss that. But I'm not giving up primary custody so you can play happy family with your new husband. Ethan, this conversation is over, Tessa. If you want to pursue this, talk to your lawyer, but I'm not negotiating my daughter's life on a phone call. He hung up before she could respond, his hands shaking with adrenaline. The hallway felt too small, the air too thin, and Ethan stood there trying to regulate his breathing while his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Vivian's door opened and she stood in the threshold watching him with clinical assessment. Everything all right, Mr. Cole? Fine. Personal matter. You look like you're about to either fight someone or vomit. Neither is conducive to professional productivity. She stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. What happened? Tessa wants to change the custody arrangement. Wants Mia during the week, me on weekends. Says it's about opportunities and school districts, but really it's about control. Vivian's expression hardened. And you said? I said no. I said I'd fight her if she pursues it legally. Good. Vivian crossed her arms, her posture shifting into something that looked almost protective. Do you have a lawyer? Not a custody lawyer, no. I used a mediator for the divorce. That won't be sufficient if Tessa escalates this. You'll need someone who specializes in family law, someone aggressive enough to match whatever legal team Derek can afford. She pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at Ethan. I'm sending you contact information for Margaret Chen. She's the best custody attorney in the city, and she owes me a favor. Tell her I referred you. She'll take your case. Ethan stared at her, something warm and complicated unfurling in his chest. Ms. Cross, you don't have to. I'm not doing this out of charity, Mr. Cole. I'm protecting my investment. I just promoted you to chief of staff. I can't have you distracted by custody battles and legal maneuvering when you should be focused on organizational efficiency. But her eyes told a different story, something softer than strategic calculation. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. For everything. For the promotion, for the lawyer referral, for showing up to the wedding when you had absolutely no reason to. For seeing me when I'd gotten very good at being invisible. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw something flicker across her face. Vulnerability, maybe, or recognition of how thoroughly their professional boundaries had blurred into something more complicated. You were never invisible, Ethan. You just surrounded yourself with people who didn't know how to see. Oh, she paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. And for the record, I didn't show up to that wedding for strategic reasons or professional obligation. I showed up because you asked, and because watching you diminish yourself to make other people comfortable had become unacceptable to me. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them seemed ready to fully examine. Does this change things? Ethan asked. Between us? The promotion? The wedding? This conversation? Everything changes things, Mr. Cole. The question is whether we allow those changes to make us more effective or less. Vivian straightened, pulling her professional armor back into place like someone donning familiar clothing. We're colleagues who respect each other's competence. We're partners in maintaining organizational excellence. And occasionally, when circumstances warrant it, we're allies in navigating the social warfare that passes for civilized society. None of those roles require us to define them more specifically than that. It was classic Vivian, answering the question while completely avoiding it, providing clarity while maintaining ambiguity. Ethan found himself smiling despite everything. Understood, Ms. Cross. Good. Now get back to work. The Hanover dinner's Thursday, and I need you to coordinate the logistics with your usual precision. Chief of staff or not, you're still responsible for ensuring I don't spend the evening dealing with incompetent event planning. She returned to her office, leaving Ethan in the hallway with a lawyer's contact information and the growing realization that his life had fundamentally shifted in ways he was only beginning to understand. The week proceeded with surprising normalcy given the seismic changes. Ethan contacted Margaret Chen, who listened to his situation with sharp professional focus and agreed to take his case with the kind of confidence that suggested Tessa's legal team would regret engaging. The custody battle would be long and probably ugly, but for the first time Ethan felt like he had the resources to fight back. The promotion was announced internally on Wednesday, and Ethan watched his colleagues' perceptions of him shift in real time. People who'd barely acknowledged him for 5 years suddenly wanted to schedule coffee meetings, wanted his input on projects, wanted to be seen talking to him in the hallway. It was simultaneously validating and exhausting. this sudden visibility after years of cultivated invisibility. Thursday evening arrived with the Hanover dinner, and Ethan found himself back in his clean tuxedo, standing beside Vivian as they entered another glittering venue filled with people who measured worth in decimal points and market share. But this time felt different. This time, Ethan walked in not as Vivian's secretary, but as her chief of staff, and the distinction mattered in ways both subtle and significant. The dinner was the usual performance of corporate theater, deals discussed over wine that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, alliances formed and dissolved between courses, the careful dance of power that happened whenever enough money gathered in one room. Ethan navigated it with the competence Vivian had trained into him, facilitating conversations, smoothing rough edges, anticipating needs before they were articulated. During a lull in the proceedings, Vivian leaned toward him slightly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You're different tonight, more present." "I'm not pretending anymore," Ethan said. "At the wedding, I was playing a role, the ex-husband trying to prove he'd moved on. Tonight, I'm just doing my job." "And the difference is?" "The difference is, I'm not trying to be someone I'm not. I'm just being who I actually am, and trusting that's enough." Vivian's expression softened fractionally. "It's more than enough, Ethan. It always has been." The use of his first name still sent a small shock through his system, a reminder of how much had shifted between them in such a short time. The dinner concluded successfully, deals were struck, hands were shaken, and Ethan and Vivian left together in the same black sedan that had taken them to the wedding. The city slid past the windows in familiar patterns, and Ethan found himself thinking about trajectories and destinations, about the difference between where you're going and where you choose to be. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said into the comfortable silence. "You can ask. I may not answer." "At the wedding you told me you came because I asked, because I never ask for anything. But there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Vivian was quiet for so long that Ethan thought she might not respond at all. Then she spoke, her voice carrying unusual weight. "5 years ago, when I hired you, I saw someone with exceptional competence who'd been systematically undervalued by people who should have known better. Your ex-wife, your previous employers, even yourself. And I made a calculated decision to maintain that undervaluation because it benefited me professionally." She turned to look at him directly. "But Saturday night, watching you hold your ground with quiet dignity while people tried to make you feel small, I realized I'd become part of the problem. I'd been so focused on protecting my investment that I'd failed to recognize I was suppressing your market value, and by extension, your sense of self-worth. So the promotion is me correcting a strategic error. But it's also an acknowledgement that you've taught me something valuable about the difference between efficiency and ethics. Sometimes the most efficient choice isn't the right one, and I'd rather work with someone I respect as an equal than maintain comfortable superiority over someone I've kept deliberately undervalued." The sedan pulled up outside Ethan's apartment building, and he made no move to exit immediately. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the honesty, for the opportunity, for being willing to change your perspective. Don't thank me yet. Being chief of staff means you'll be working longer hours, dealing with more complex problems, and managing situations that have no clear right answer. You're going to hate me at least 40% of the time." "Only 40%? I was managing 50% as your secretary." Vivian actually laughed, a real laugh that Ethan had only heard a handful of times in 5 years. "Then you're already ahead. Good night, Ethan. I'll see you tomorrow. And please, for both our sakes, make sure the morning coffee is still exactly 187 degrees. Some things shouldn't change." Ethan climbed out of the car and watched it pull away, feeling like he'd just completed some kind of journey he hadn't known he was taking. The custody battle with Tessa would be difficult. Learning his new role would be challenging. Navigating his evolving relationship with Vivian would require careful attention to boundaries that had already started blurring. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was moving toward something rather than just surviving what he'd been given. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't the footnote in someone else's success story. He was Ethan Cole, chief of staff at Cross Industries, father to an extraordinary daughter, and partner to a woman who saw him clearly enough to challenge him to see himself the same way. He went inside, climbed the stairs to his apartment, and found Mia asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest. Ethan carried her to bed, tucked her in, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I love you, baby girl," he whispered, "and I promise, whatever happens next, you're always going to come first." In the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by the modest life he'd built with care and intention, Ethan finally understood what Vivian had meant about survival versus living. For years, he'd been surviving, getting through days, meeting basic needs, accepting what he was given and being grateful for it. But now, with a promotion that recognized his value, a lawyer who would fight for his rights as a father, and a partnership with someone who challenged him to be more than comfortable, now he was living, making choices instead of accepting them, building something intentional instead of settling for what remained after other people took what they wanted. It wasn't a happy ending in the fairy tale sense. There was no declaration of love, no dramatic revelation, no neat resolution that tied everything into a perfect bow. Tessa would still fight for custody. The job would still be demanding. Vivian would still be complicated and guarded and occasionally impossible. But it was real. Messy and complicated and uncertain, but real in a way that mattered more than any polished fantasy. And for Ethan Cole, that was more than enough. It was everything he needed, everything he'd been too afraid to ask for, everything he finally had the courage to claim as his own. The wedding had changed everything, but not because Vivian had played the role of rescuer or romantic interest. It had changed everything because, for one night, Ethan had stopped making himself small to accommodate other people's comfort. He'd taken up space, held his ground, and discovered that the world didn't end when he refused to be invisible. That lesson was worth more than any promotion, any salary increase, any validation from people who'd never seen him clearly in the first place. Ethan went to bed that night with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new opportunities to either shrink back into comfortable invisibility or continue stepping into the person he was becoming. He knew which one he'd choose. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, Vivian Cross sat at her desk reviewing contracts and thinking about partnership, about the difference between efficiency and connection, about a man who'd taught her that some investments paid dividends you couldn't calculate on a spreadsheet. She didn't smile. Vivian Cross didn't indulge in unnecessary displays of emotion, but something in her expression suggested satisfaction, the kind that came from making a decision that was both strategically sound and surprisingly, unexpectedly, exactly right.